What if there was a man who walked so close to heaven that death could never touch him? Imagine that a heartbeat so pure, a spirit so gentle, that the world itself could no longer hold him. The earth beneath his feet was real, yet his soul seemed to belong somewhere else, somewhere brighter, quieter, untouched by sorrow or decay. The man's name was Enoch. Long before the flood, before the first great empires, before even the names of angels were known to humankind, Enoch walked among the people. He wasn't a king, nor a warrior. He was a man whose days were filled with stillness, whose nights were lit by conversations with the divine. And in those conversations, something sacred was shared, something so holy that even heaven itself drew near. Enoch's story begins in a time when the world was young and unscarred. The mountains still whispered the name of their maker, and rivers carried songs of light. Humanity lived between two worlds, one of dust and one of spirit, and it was there, between those worlds, that Enoch walked. People often spoke of him in hushed voices, as if saying his name too loudly might summon a wind that could lift them away. He was not like other men, not because of strength or wealth, but because of quietness. There was a peace about him, something untouched by fear. When others toiled and argued, Enoch listened. When others built towers of stone, he built altars of prayer. It is said that he spoke to God as a friend speaks to a friend, not through ritual, not through sacrifice, but through love, through reverence, through the still beating of a humble heart. And heaven, it seems, listened back. But time, as it always does, moved on. The world began to change. People forgot the sound of God's voice and the warmth of his nearness. Their hearts grew heavy, their eyes turned downward. Yet even then, Enoch walked among them, a reminder that the divine had not left. When he passed through a village, people felt lighter. Some said the air itself shimmered as he went by. Enoch's life was not filled with grandeur or miracles that shook the skies. Instead, his miracles were quiet, the peace in his gaze, the wisdom in his silence, the sense that wherever he stood, heaven was close enough to touch. He had no army, no throne, no gold, yet his name reached the ears of angels. They watched him, these beings of light, curious about this man of clay who carried a soul too bright for the ground beneath him. They whispered among themselves, saying, "He walks in two realms, one of earth, one of spirit." And then he was gone. No illness, no grave, no farewell, only absence. One day he walked with God, and he did not return. The people searched. They called his name into the wind. Some climbed the hills where he used to pray. Others waited by the trees where he would sit at dusk, hoping to see him appear again. But he didn't. All that remained was a stillness, a quiet so deep that it seemed to hum with something holy. And so, the story spread that Enoch never died, that he was taken, body and soul, into the heavens, not stolen, not punished, taken, like a flame returning to the sun that lit it. The scriptures tell us simply, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not. For God took him, no more, no less." A sentence that feels like the whisper of eternity, and yet, behind those few words lies a mystery that has haunted humankind for thousands of years. Why him? Why did heaven reach down and lift this man from the earth while the rest of humanity was left to wither in dust and years? Was it his purity? His faith? Or did he carry some divine secret that even angels dared not reveal? Enoch's disappearance became the beginning of countless questions. Some said he was shown the architecture of heaven, the hidden foundations of creation. Others claimed he walked through the chambers of light and saw the fate of souls, the rebellion of angels, the secrets written on heavenly tablets. And though centuries have passed, the world still hungers to understand him, because somewhere deep in our hearts, we all long for what Enoch found, that closeness, that peace, that nearness to something eternal. Maybe that's why his story still stirs us, because it's not just about a man who never died. It's about the ache inside every human soul to be known by its creator, to walk beside him, to live a life that feels more like a prayer than a struggle. Enoch's tale is not a myth to be explained, but a mirror to be felt. When you close your eyes tonight and breathe softly, you might sense a whisper, the same whisper that once guided him through the shadows of the ancient world. It calls not with thunder, but with tenderness. It says, "Walk with me." And perhaps that's what Enoch did. He simply kept walking until the path vanished beneath his feet, and heaven became the next step. He didn't seek immortality. He didn't conquer death. He just walked, and God took him home. So maybe the question isn't, what if a man never died? Maybe it's this: what if we learned to live like Enoch did, so close to heaven that even death forgets our name? Help us reach 5,000 subscribers. Share this story with your friends, and comment your name and city below. Tell us from where and at what time you're watching this video. And if you want the complete Book of Enoch and the Ethiopian Bible, 88 books in English, their links are waiting for you in the description. The holy words of heaven used to be spread out all over the earth, like pieces of light. They weren't all in one book. A whisper of creation and a memory of the unseen were in the voice of each people and land. But as time went on, and kingdoms rose and empires fought for the truth, something changed. People started to forget. Some words were not allowed to be spoken, some were erased, and some were just not spoken. But in a quiet part of the world, high up in the old mountains of Ethiopia, those lost voices were still alive, breathing through the pages that time could not destroy. When the Western world started to write what we now call the Bible, it wasn't prophets who made the decisions. It was councils and kings. People gathered, talked about, and split up the scrolls. Some were chosen to stay, while others were hidden away or called too dangerous for normal people to see. Because of these choices, whole books disappeared from the common language. They spoke of angels and heavens, of mysteries too vast for the world's growing hunger for control. These were texts that didn't make sense in any way. One of them was the Book of Enoch, which was so old that even the memory of where it came from seemed older than time itself. It told stories that the early church couldn't easily explain, like how watchers came down from heaven, how secrets were written on heavenly tablets, and how a man was taken into the skies to see how creation worked and how the fallen were punished. It was a vision that was too big, too strange, and too full of divine fire. And so it was quieted, but the quiet wasn't total. The Western world looked away, but Ethiopia stood firm. In the highlands, where faith was based on devotion rather than empire, the old words lived on. The Ethiopian Bible, which is older and has more books than the Western canon, kept the books that other people had thrown away. There were not just 66, but 88 holy texts in it, and among them was the Book of Enoch, which had been kept in the ancient Ge'ez language. It was a voice that had been passed down through generations without being touched by outsiders. Can you believe that one country is protecting what the rest of the world has forgotten? For thousands of years, while scholars fought about which texts should define faith, Monks in Ethiopian monasteries quietly read from books that told of heaven's secret counsels. They copied them by candlelight, writing each letter with care and keeping each word as if it were the breath of God. People outside of the church began to spread rumors about these writings, saying they were forbidden books that talked too openly about the secrets of God, but Ethiopia never made them illegal. They were the truth that was sacred, a gift they were given when others had turned their backs. The Book of Giants was one of the lost books. Not many people have seen all of its words because most of it is in pieces that were found in the caves of Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden. But even in its broken state, it has a strange, powerful echo. It tells the story of the Watcher's children, the giants that were born when angels and human women got together. These beings were very strong and sad. It talks about how they were corrupt, hungry, and sad when they realized they were going to die. And even though it has lines, you can still feel heaven's sadness for what was lost. The Book of Giants and the Book of Enoch tell the same story, but one is from heaven and the other is from earth. They tell a story that goes all the way through creation. They talk about how angels looked at people with awe, how they broke God's rules, and how their disobedience made creatures that didn't belong to either world anymore. These writings were kept secret for hundreds of years because they gave away too much information about things that couldn't be seen. They talked about how angels ruled the stars, how divine order ruled the universe, and how the Watchers once taught people forbidden knowledge, how to make weapons, use magic, and fight and be vain. They taught people how to be proud, which led to destruction. But maybe the main reason these books were buried is that they showed heaven in a way that was too close and personal. God is not far away in the Book of Enoch. Angels are not just light. They are real beings who feel, love, and fall. The universe itself is alive, with a divine rhythm that sings of mercy and justice. And Enoch, the man who never died, walks through it all. People say that when Enoch was taken, he was shown the hidden paths of the universe, where time and spirit meet. He saw the prisons of the fallen, the 7 heavens that are above the world, and the fire that holds everything together. He was told what would happen to the Watchers and that a flood would come and wash away their sins. His writings were like a window into the divine. They were a warning, a prophecy, and a promise all at the same time. When these texts were taken out of the Western canon, the world lost more than just stories. It lost a way of seeing things that made heaven and earth seem closer together. Not only did the Book of Enoch talk about God's judgment, it also talked about how close he was to people. It showed a world where the divine walked with people and the unseen was as real as the ground beneath their feet, even though it was thrown away. The story wouldn't die. Copies that were hidden in ancient monasteries and passed down from generation to generation by faith until the world finally started to remember, when explorers and priests finally found the Ethiopian church in the 18th century. They discovered what the rest of the Christian world had lost, the missing parts of heaven's scripture, which was still alive and sung in prayer. Opening the Ethiopian Bible takes you to a place that Western editing has never been. The pages are full of divine mystery. The Book of Enoch is not just a relic. It is a living witness. It speaks with a calm authority, as if to remind the world that God's truth can't be erased. It can only be hidden until the right time comes for it to be seen again. And when you read its words, you can almost hear the echo of those who tried to silence it, and the whisper of those who never let it die. The West may have lost Enoch's voice for a while, but Ethiopia never did. There, the man who walked with God still walks not in flesh, but through ink and scripture, which have been protected against the will of empires and the dust of time. Some truths are so true that they will never go away. They may sleep for a long time, but they never die. And somewhere in the lines of those old pages, the same light that took Enoch to heaven still shines, waiting for hearts that are willing to remember what the world tried to forget. There was no noise on earth at first, not the kind of silence that makes you feel empty, but one that brought a strange and gentle peace. The mountains seemed to be listening to the heartbeat of creation. The oceans sparkled under a sky that was still new, and every star seemed to hum softly in its place. It was a world without scars, a place where God's breath still filled the air and the wind seemed to remember his voice. And from the unseen heights of heaven, there were eyes watching over everything. The watchers were powerful beings of light who protected the earth, and were placed among the stars to watch the world grow below. They had seen how God made man, how dust was given life, and how weakness was blessed with divine breath. And even though they were pure spirits and didn't have bodies, something moved in them when they looked at people. At first, it was awe. They were amazed by how beautiful the human heart is, even though it is so fragile. They saw men build their homes, mothers hold their children close, and laughter come from campfires under the moon. Every little thing felt like it was holy. Every move and every song sounded like music from heaven. The angels saw the world below as pure and innocent, but as time went on, their watching turned into something more than duty. It turned into a desire, not a desire for corruption, but a desire to understand what they could never touch. They were immortal and unchanging, but people lived in the flow of time. In just one breath, people loved, lost, and hoped. They didn't understand that kind of life, and the first signs of rebellion started to show in that. Mystery. The watchers looked down from their places in the sky, through the veil that separates spirit and flesh. They saw men working in the fields, their hands dirty with dirt and their eyes full of dreams. They heard women singing to their children and gathering water. Their voices echoed through the valleys. The angels came closer because they saw how fragile humans were and how they held on to their faith even when they were weak. Heaven could not hold back its beauty. Some of the many people watching started to whisper. The thought passed between them quietly, like the sound of wings rustling. Why does the Most High love these kinds of beings so much? Why should the breath of eternity live in people who are going to die? And why were the watchers of heaven not allowed to walk among them? At first, the questions were just out of curiosity. But once curiosity is born, it is hard to stop. One of them was named Enoch. His light was bright and powerful. He looked at the earth longer than most people do. He saw not only its beauty, but also its sadness. He heard the cries of people and felt something strange inside him, something like compassion and something like envy. He thought about what it would be like to live in that short-lived world, to feel pain, to love, and to make choices. The angels had always known how to obey. Their song was harmony, and their will was in line with the Creator's. But when you question obedience, it starts to fade like light at dusk. And as Semyaza's thoughts grew deeper, so did the whispers among his family. The book of Enoch says that 200 watchers came down to the mountain called Hermon. But before they came down, there was a night when heaven itself seemed to shake in silence. The stars were low, the earth was asleep, and the line between worlds got thinner. In that stillness, the angels gathered at the edge of the sky. their shapes glowing softly in the never-ending twilight. They didn't talk very loudly. Their words were careful, almost sad, as if they already knew how heavy the decision they were about to make would be. One person said, "We've been watching them for too long. They live short lives, but they are full. We see how hard they fight, how hungry they are, and how their prayers go unanswered as they rise to heaven. Is it not possible for us to walk among them? Can't we help them understand?" But some people were unsure. Another person said, "It is not given to us. To cross that line is to undo what was done. We are bright. Dust is what they are. We will not rise again if we fall into their world." The silence that came after was louder than thunder. They could feel the pull of the world below them, curiosity, longing, and something they couldn't name. And one by one, they started to lose their determination. He looked at his brothers of light and said things that would be heard forever. "Then let's swear together," he said in a soft voice, "and make a promise to each other. If we are going to fall, let's not let anyone fall alone." That one thought was what started the rebellion. It wasn't yelled in anger or carried with pride. It started as a whisper of love for what they couldn't have, for the world that burned with a life they would never live. So, the watchers made their quiet deal under the stars that were watching them. The sky above them seemed to get darker, as if it were mourning what was about to happen. They made their promise on Mount Hermon, which would always be a witness to their choice. But before they went down, there was silence, again a last pause, a moment of heaven's doubt. A part of them shook, even as they made their choice. They knew that they couldn't take back what they were about to do. Touching the ground would mean losing heaven. To love all people would mean giving up eternity. But the desire was stronger than the fear. The night got darker down below. Fires flickered in the valleys, lighting up the faces of people who were sleeping without knowing that angels were watching over them. The wind blew gently over the fields, bringing with it a faint sense of change, quiet warning of what was to come. They started to come down from the high gates of heaven. Their light trembled as it touched the clouds, and their brightness streaked across the sky like falling stars. For the people of earth, it must have seemed like beauty itself had fallen from the sky, a sign, a wonder, a miracle. But heaven saw it as sad. Their feet touched the stones on Mount Hermon, and the ground shook. For the first time, the divine and the mortal were together. The watchers stood in the fog with their wings folded close and their eyes wide with wonder. They saw the world they had only ever seen on TV. Now it was right in front of them, warm and real, breathing in the same air that carried God's voice. It was the calm before the storm, the last breath before the uprising. Even though they came with awe and longing, they had crossed a line that heaven had set up since the beginning of time. The ground below stayed quiet, not knowing that something had changed. The angels didn't see people as faraway protectors. They saw them as friends who they could hold and love. At that moment, the stars above seemed to fade, as if the heavens were closing their eyes. What started out as wonder had turned into something else, something weak, illegal, and unstoppable. The first spark of a cosmic rebellion had been born. And even though the night still felt peaceful, the universe itself had shifted ever so slightly out of harmony. The watchers had fallen, not because they were being punished, but because they wanted to. As they looked down at the earth, the line between heaven and man got thinner and thinner, until it shook like light on the edge of a dream. People say that when Enoch was taken, he was shown the hidden paths of the universe where time and spirit meet. He saw the prisons of the fallen, the seven heavens that are above the world, and the fire that holds everything together. He was told what would happen to the watchers and that a flood would come and wash away their sins. His writings were like a window into the divine. They were a warning, a prophecy, and a promise all at the same time. When these texts were taken out of the Western canon, the world lost more than just stories. It lost a way of seeing things that made heaven and earth seem closer together. Not only did the Book of Enoch talk about God's judgment, it also talked about how close he was to people. It showed a world where the divine walked with people and the unseen was as real as the ground beneath their feet, even though it was thrown away. The story wouldn't die. Copies that were hidden in ancient monasteries and passed down from generation to generation. By faith, until the world finally started to remember. When explorers and priests finally found the Ethiopian church in the 18th century, they discovered what the rest of the Christian world had lost, the missing parts of heaven's scripture, which were still alive and sung in prayer. Opening the Ethiopian Bible takes you to a place that Western editing has never been. The pages are full of divine mystery. The Book of Enoch is not just a relic. It is a living witness. It speaks with a calm authority, as if to remind the world that God's truth can't be erased. It can only be hidden until the right time comes for it to be seen again. And when you read its words, you can almost hear the echo of those who tried to silence it and the whisper of those who never let it die. The West may have lost Enoch's voice for a while, but Ethiopia never did. There, the man who walked with God still walks not in flesh, but through ink and scripture, which have been protected against the will of empires and the dust of time. Some truths are so true that they will never go away. They may sleep for a long time, but they never die. And somewhere in the lines of those old pages, the same light that took Enoch to heaven still shines, waiting for hearts that are willing to remember what the world tried to forget. There was no noise on earth at first, not the kind of silence that makes you feel empty, but one that brought a strange and gentle peace. The mountains seemed to be listening to the heartbeat of creation. The oceans sparkled under a sky that was still new, and every star seemed to hum softly in its place. It was a world without scars, a place where God's breath still filled the air, and the winds seemed to remember his voice. And from the unseen heights of heaven, there were eyes watching over everything. The watchers were powerful beings of light who protected the earth, and were placed among the stars to watch the world grow below. They had seen how God made man, how dust was given life, and how weakness was blessed with divine breath. And even though they were pure spirits and didn't have bodies, something moved in them when they looked at people. At first, it was awe. They were amazed by how beautiful the human heart is, even though it is so fragile. They saw men build their homes, mothers hold their children close, and laughter come from campfires under the moon. Every little thing felt like it was holy. Every move and every song sounded like music from heaven. The angels saw the world below as pure and innocent, but as time went on, their watching turned into something more than duty. It turned into a desire, not a desire for corruption, but a desire to understand what they could never touch. They were immortal and unchanging, but people lived in the flow of time. In just one breath, people loved, lost, and hoped. They didn't understand that kind of life, and the first signs of rebellion started to show in that. The Watchers looked down from their places in the sky through the veil that separates spirit and flesh. They saw men working in the fields, their hands dirty with dirt and their eyes full of dreams. They heard women singing to their children and gathering water. Their voices echoed through the valleys. The angels came closer because they saw how fragile humans were and how they held on to their faith even when they were weak. Heaven could not hold back its beauty. Some of the many people watching started to whisper. The thought passed between them quietly, like the sound of wings rustling. Why does the Most High love these kinds of beings so much? Why should the breath of eternity live in people who are going to die? And why were the watchers of heaven not allowed to walk among them? At first, the questions were just out of curiosity. But once curiosity is born, it is hard to stop. One of them was named Semya. His light was bright and powerful. He looked at the earth longer than most people do. He saw not only its beauty, but also its sadness. He heard the cries of people and felt something strange inside him, something like compassion and something like envy. He thought about what it would be like to live in that short-lived world, to feel pain, to love, and to make choices. The angels had always known how to obey. Their song was harmony, and their will was in line with the Creator's. But when you question obedience, it starts to fade like light at dusk. And as Semyaz's thoughts grew deeper, so did the whispers among his family. The book of Enoch says that 200 watchers came down to the mountain called Hermon. But before they came down, there was a night when heaven itself seemed to shake in silence. The stars were low, the earth was asleep, and the line between worlds got thinner. In that stillness, the angels gathered at the edge of the sky, their shapes glowing softly in the never-ending twilight. They didn't talk very loudly. Their words were careful, almost sad, as if they already knew how heavy the decision they were about to make would be. One person said, "We've been watching them for too long. They live short lives, but they are full. We see how hard they fight, how hungry they are, and how their prayers go unanswered as they rise to heaven. Is it not possible for us to walk among them? Can't we help them understand?" But some people were unsure. Another person said, "It is not given to us. To cross that line is to undo what was done. We are bright. Dust is what they are. We will not rise again if we fall into their world." The silence that came after was louder than thunder. They could feel the pull of the world below, them curiosity, longing, and something they couldn't name. And one by one, they started to lose their determination. He looked at his brothers of light and said things that would be heard forever. "Then let's swear together," he said in a soft voice, "and make a promise to each other. If we are going to fall, let's not let anyone fall alone." That one thought was what started the rebellion. It wasn't yelled in anger or carried with pride. It started as a whisper of love for what they couldn't have, for the world that burned with a life they would never live. So, the watchers made their quiet deal under the stars that were watching them. The sky above them seemed to get darker, as if it were mourning what was about to happen. They made their promise on Mount Hermon, which would always be a witness to their choice. But before they went down, there was silence again, a last pause, a moment of heaven's doubt. A part of them shook, even as they made their choice. They knew that they couldn't take back what they were about to do. Touching the ground would mean losing heaven. To love all people would mean giving up eternity. But the desire was stronger than the fear. The night got darker down below. Fires flickered in the valleys, lighting up the faces of people who were sleeping without knowing that angels were watching over them. The wind blew gently over the fields, bringing with it a faint sense of change, quiet warning of what was to come. They started to come down from the high gates of heaven. Their light trembled as it touched the clouds, and their brightness streaked across the sky like falling stars. For the people of earth, it must have seemed like beauty itself had fallen from the sky as sign, a wonder, a miracle. But heaven saw it as sad. Their feet touched the stones on Mount Hermon, and the ground shook. For the first time, the divine and the mortal were together. The watchers stood in the fog with their wings folded close and their eyes wide with wonder. They saw the world they had only ever seen on TV. Now it was right in front of them, warm and real, breathing in the same air that carried God's voice. It was the calm before the storm, the last breath before the uprising. Even though they came with awe and longing, they had crossed a line that heaven had set up since the beginning of time. The ground below stayed quiet, not knowing that something had changed. The angels didn't see people as faraway protectors. They saw them as friends who they could hold and love. At that moment, the stars above seemed to fade, as if the heavens were closing their eyes. What started out as wonder had turned into something else, something weak, illegal, and unstoppable. The first spark of a cosmic rebellion had been born, and even though the night still felt peaceful, the universe itself had shifted ever so slightly out of harmony. The watchers had fallen, not because they were being punished, but because they wanted to. As they looked down at the earth, the line between heaven and man got thinner and thinner, until it shook like light on the edge of a dream. It was a night like no other, calm sash silver and completely still. The stars hung in the sky like silent witnesses, their light shining down on the huge world below. The air was thick but soft, as if the heavens were holding their breath. 200 beings stood between obedience and desire on the edge of eternity. They were angels, also known as watchers, who were told to watch over the children of men, guide them from a distance, and never get involved. But when they saw how beautiful Earth was and how delicate its creatures were, something started to move inside them, amazement, wanting to know, and in that curiosity, a spark that God never meant to start. They met at the top of Mount Hermon, a mountain whose name will always be remembered. Its peaks broke through the clouds, and its silence was as deep as the sea. Semiezer, their leader, stood there in the dim light of the moon. He looked bright and serious, but he was shaking with the weight of what was to come. He looked at the crowd that had followed him with his wings folded close and his voice steady but full of doubt. They were beautiful beings of light who had been around since before time began. But now they were standing on the ground of earth like exiles in their own creation. The night wind whispered softly through the mountains, stone, and it felt like everything in the world stopped to listen. Semiezer said in a low, commanding voice, "You know what we have seen. The daughters of men are beautiful and pure. Their hearts beat in a way that is different from ours. We have seen them grow up, fall in love, and have kids. And inside that mystery is something bigger than we have ever known." His words were full of both desire and fear. The others moved, and their bright shapes flickered in the mist. Then they started to whisper to each other. Some voices shook with desire, while others shook with doubt. Azazel stepped forward, his eyes sparkling like burning coals. "If we are going to do this, let's do it together, because this action can't be undone." His voice was sharp, and he was sure of himself. He was the brave one, the one who lit the fire in the hearts of those around him. Semiezer looked up at the sky. "I fear this," he said in a low voice, "because if we fall, we will be stuck on this earth forever. Heaven will no longer see our names as holy." His words hung in the air, shaking between giving up and fighting back. But the smell, mystery, and warmth of earth had already gotten deep inside them. The host stood still for a long time, and then they all nodded. Their faces, which had once been bright with divine purity, now glimmered with determination. they all came together around Semiezer and held out their hands. "Then swear," he said in a low voice. "Swear on this mountain, in front of the Eternal, that we won't turn back. If one falls, all will fall together." And that's what they promised. The oath didn't tie them up in chains of iron, but in threads of will and spirit. It felt like the stones on Mount Hermon were crying out in pain. A wind rose up, sudden, strong, and empty, and it echoed through the valleys below. The mountain took their vow and sealed it in its heart. The sky got darker, hiding its brightness from what was about to happen. As the last words of the oath faded away, a strange calm came over them. They looked down at the earth below, where forests whispered in the moonlight. Rivers shone like silver snakes, and the soft breath of people drifted through their dreams. Then, one by one, they started to fall. It wasn't a fall. It was a graceful giving up. Their shapes flew through the air like lines of light and shadow, and their brightness faded as they entered the world of flesh and soil. The ground shook slightly, and the grass bent as if it were bowing to them. It was so beautiful, but it hurt so much because it was something that couldn't be changed. They landed in the valleys below Mount Hermon, and for the first time, heavenly feet touched earthly ground. The stars above seemed to fade as they silently watched heaven's own servants become strangers in their own home. The air around them sparkled, and their once pure essence was now mixed with the dust of the world. The air was sweet with the smell of flowers, the smell of the ground after rain, and the smell of life itself. The angels took deep breaths and tasted the world they had always wanted to be a part of. Every feeling was new. The creatures around them made their hearts beat like a song they had forgotten. But under that wonder, a sadness began to grow, weak and hidden, like the shadow of an eclipse. First, Azazel stepped forward. He looked at the settlements of men with a look of interest and desire. He said softly, "This is what heaven kept from us, to feel, to make." The watchers stood around him, quiet and in awe of him. But the line had been crossed. The divine had entered the world of mortals, and the order of the heavens would never be the same again. Again, Semiezer looked up at the sky. He couldn't get in anymore. The stars looked far away, cold and watching. He felt a tremor deep inside him, not fear, but the weight of his fate. He said, "Let it be done." His words blew away like ashes in the wind. The night stayed unnaturally still, like it does before a storm. The watchers started to move through the valleys, learning how to speak the language of the earth and how to interact with the people they had only seen before. Their bright shapes started to change into softer ones that looked more like people. They became flesh, and with it came desire, weakness, and sadness. A chord had been struck deep in the heart of creation. The stars in the heavens moved around nervously, as if they were grieving. For the first time in history, divine light had chosen the darkness on its own. And even though the night was still full of the beauty of their descent, a faint cry seemed to come from the ground itself. It was a sound that would echo through the ages in stories of giants, sin, and judgment. But the world was still sleeping. The watchers walked under the pale light of the moon, their hearts full of wonder and defiance, and their wings were heavy with the weight of what they had done. The mountain behind them was quiet, a witness to the promise that would one day break heaven's peace for good. After they fell, the world started to change in ways that no one could have ever imagined. The watchers, now dressed like men, walked through the valleys and rivers of the earth. Their beauty was otherworldly, and their presence made people feel both safe and uneasy. To the sons of men, They looked like gods who had come down from the sky. And maybe, for a brief moment, that's what they were, gods who held the breath of eternity in their bodies. But the beautiful and shiny gifts they brought would soon become the things that made people sad. Semiezer walked among the people with a quiet grace, his eyes full of light and sadness. He taught them things that no one else had ever known, like the names of the winds, the patterns of the stars, and how the heavens move. He talked about the seasons, planting and harvesting, and signs that told time. Men listened in awe, their hearts racing as they learned how to read the sky. But there was more to those teachings than that. There was a quiet pride and a growing belief that knowledge could rival God's wisdom. Azazel, who was brave and fiery, gave people what he called the craft of strength. He taught them how to dig into the ground and find its hidden treasures, like iron and copper veins that lay beneath the mountains. He was able to shape metal into things like blades that shone like the sun and ornaments that were unnaturally beautiful. The people were amazed. They made weapons out of stones and sticks that used to be there. They polished bronze to make mirrors, and for the first time, men and women saw their own reflections. They fell in love not with the soul, but with the image. Women wore beautiful jewels and thin chains to make themselves look good. Their faces shone with powders of rare color, and their eyes got darker with stone and herb mixes that Azazel had taught them how to make. The watchers saw their beauty twisted into human vanity when they looked at them. What had started out as awe quickly turned into desire, and what was meant to lift spirits became a mirror of pride. Penemu, one of the watchers, taught the secret of writing, symbols that could hold thoughts and keep them for a long time. The art of memory used to be a holy thing, but soon the purity of words gave way to the art of lying, and speech that could have praised the Creator began to weave spells and curses. Another one, called Kazdia, told us the secrets of roots and herbs. At first, men used them to heal the sick, ease pain, and calm their heart's sadness. But that wisdom slowly changed. The herbs turned into magical tools that made it hard to tell the difference between life and death, spirit and shadow. The watchers watched in silence as their holy teachings became wild and twisted in the hands of people. On some nights, the stars seemed to fade as the watchers stood apart from people and looked into the distance. They remembered how bright heaven was and how the songs of light used to fill their souls. Now they only heard the sound of hammers hitting metal, the whispers of spells, and the laughter of people who no longer feared God. The knowledge they had given burned like fire in the hands of men, first warming them and then consuming them. The earth started to feel it too. The ground, which used to be soft and gentle, was now full of mines and forges. The skies that had once been clear were now filled with smoke. The rivers got darker as they carried the dust of both new creation and destruction, and people's hearts began to feel uneasy. Power, which they had never known before, now stirred in them a desire to rule, to own, and to become more than human. Semiezer would often walk alone at night, haunted by memories of heaven. He would look at the fires in human settlements glowing alive, and restless and whisper, "This was not what we were meant to give." Only the wind could hear the sadness in his voice. The other watchers around him also started to change. The glow of divinity that once surrounded them began to fade, and in its place came a heavy weight of guilt, love that was not right, and knowledge that was not used. From their union with the daughters of men came strong, shining beings whose laughter shook the air. They weren't gods or people. They were something in between, something that the world couldn't hold. The Nephilim were these kids who grew up quickly and were always hungry. They ate everything in front of them: animals, crops, and soon even people. The ground shook under their feet. But before the world fell into darkness, those days were still beautiful in a fragile way. The Watchers taught their human friends about the secrets of the earth, the patterns in the sky, and how to make and shape things. There were songs sung at night that had never been heard before, some that were happy and some that were sad. It was as if everything in the universe held its breath, knowing that this knowledge came at too high a cost. Some of the humans felt the weight of what was going on. The elders cried as they looked up at the sky because the stars no longer sang. There was no sound where angels had danced before. The people didn't know what was going on, but they could feel the sadness in the air, a strange ache that seemed to seep into the ground. Azazel, full of fiery pride, saw the chaos his gifts had caused and called it progress. "They have become like us," he said, watching men make weapons and decorations with their new skills. "They shaped their own fate, just like we shaped the heavens." But Semyezer turned away. "They have become like us," he said softly, "but not how we were meant to be." He looked up at the sky, but no light came back to him. The Watchers couldn't sleep night after night. They walked from village to village, seeing how their teachings were taking root. Some of them tried to undo what they had done and warn the people, but it was too late. The spark had turned into a fire. The world had tasted power and couldn't forget it. There was a strange silence after that. Not peace, but excitement, as if the heavens were watching and waiting. The Watchers still walked among people, their faces calm and their voices calm. But behind their eyes was a regret that was too deep for words. They had given the world gifts from heaven, but in the hands of mortals. Heaven's light had turned to shadow, and so they watched, unable to turn back. As their secrets spread like whispers across the earth, secrets that once belonged to the stars, now resting in the hearts of men. People had never seen beings like this before. Children were born to mortal women, but they were not limited by time or flesh. Their first cries weren't soft. They were loud enough to shake the water and scare the animals. The Nephilim were the children of the Watchers and the daughters of men. They grew at an unnatural rate, and before their voices matured, their bodies were already taller than their parents. The ground shook under their feet, and their shadows grew long as the sun rose. At first, they looked like real miracles. People from nearby villages came to see them, amazed by how beautiful and strong they were. Their eyes shone with a strange light, not the innocence of a child, but the fire of people who remembered a different world. They spoke with wisdom that no one had taught them, and their laughter was like thunder, scaring and enchanting everyone who heard it. Some people thought they were gods. Some people said they were a curse. But everyone agreed that the world would never be the same again. The Nephilim walked through the woods like they owned them. The trees bent when they touched them, and the rivers split when they walked. The sons of men were amazed at first, but then they were afraid. Even though the Nephilim were strong, they were even hungrier. They ate enough food for dozens, then hundreds. Neither fields nor herds nor flocks could keep them alive. They wanted more than the earth could give them. When they ran out of food, they looked at the living. People whispered stories at night about villages that disappeared, animals that were ripped apart, and blood that soaked the ground. But there was something sad in their eyes, a deep and restless sadness. They didn't know how much damage they were doing. They were born into a world that was too small for them and carried the chaos of both heaven and earth in their souls. Some of them wanted peace. They walked alone, far away from other people, and talked softly to the wind and the sea, as if they could still hear their angelic father's voices, but there was never peace. Their own kind became restless, hungry, and wild with power. They fought each other, and their fights shook the ground, turning once fertile plains into wastelands. The mountains split, the rivers turned red, and the dying cried out to the heavens. Semyeza looked on from a distance, his heart heavy. He had once thought that the children could bring heaven and earth together, but now they were a storm that neither realm could hold. He thought back to the day they were born and how their mothers had looked at them with both awe and fear. A lot of those women died soon after giving birth because their bodies couldn't handle the stress of having babies. The angels were sad for them, but their sadness was lost in the chaos their children caused. The world started to lose its peace. The animals became cautious and hid deep in caves and forests. Birds stopped singing as much. The stars above even seemed to be dimmer, as if they were mourning the loss of creation's innocence. The Nephilim looked up at the heavens that wouldn't talk to them because they were sad. They didn't belong there or on earth. Heaven's glory and earth's weakness had become one in them, and it tore them apart from the inside. They made huge stone cities that were bigger and taller than any person could build. These cities shone in the sun like lost kingdoms made of gold and iron, but they weren't peaceful places. They became places of pride and conquest, where strength ruled and mercy was gone. Some of them were kings who said they were gods and told people to serve and worship them. The daughters of men who were once loved now lived in fear. The Nephilim's laughter, which used to sound happy, now sounded cruel. But even though they were powerful, they couldn't get away from the emptiness that was growing inside them. They dreamed of light, which was like seeing heaven but never being able to get there. Some woke up crying, speaking in languages that no one could understand, and calling out to fathers who no longer answered. The Watchers were powerless to stop the pain of their children from spreading across the earth because they had rebelled. People said that when the Nephilim cried, their tears made valleys. Storms ripped through the skies when they got angry. The balance of creation was off. Men began to cry out to heaven for help, their prayers rising through the smoke of fields that were on fire. But above them there was silence, as if even heaven was waiting. Mourning the angel children who had lost their way, the oldest Nephilim started to fight with each other. Once their pride was their glory, it became their downfall. The stronger ate the weaker, thinking that power could fill the empty space inside. Their wars left scars on the earth, and the once green lands turned into wastelands of dust and ash. The rivers turned black, the trees fell, and even the sky seemed to get heavier. The sons of men hid where they could and whispered the name of God in scared voices. A few of the Nephilim tried to fight the darkness. They asked their fathers, the Watchers, for advice and begged for a way to be saved. But the fallen angels couldn't help. They were lost themselves, stuck between heaven and earth, and unable to go back to either. They were punished by being silent, and their children had to deal with it. The nights got colder. In the ruined cities, fires burned all the time, casting shadows that went on for miles. The laughter that used to shake the mountains turned into screams of rage and confusion. And through it all, the earth, their old mother who had once held them, began to groan in pain. The violence and sadness that had taken over her heart could no longer handle it. People who lived through it told stories about the giants as both monsters and mourners, powerful beings who were hurt by their own existence. There were stories that said the Nephilim's eyes shone with tears when they walked by moonlight. showing a sadness that had been around since the world began. Some people said that while they slept, the ground shook below them and they had dreams of a lost paradise. Their numbers started to go down over time. They were consumed by hunger, war, and the curse of their nature. But their memory lived on, not as stories, but as scars on the land. There were big rocks all over the place where they had fallen. Rivers changed direction where they had walked. Once, their breath filled the air, but now there is only silence. And the heavens kept watching. The cries of both the innocent and the guilty rose together, making a sound that even the gates of light couldn't block. What had started as love between angels and humans had turned into a wound that ran through all of creation, and heaven could no longer ignore it. The earth was no longer quiet. It sighed under the weight of sadness, and its voice shook through roots and rivers, through wind and rain that fell. It had once heard the laughter of creation and the hum of harmony between heaven and earth, but that song was no longer there. The fields that used to feed people were dark with blood, and the waters that used to shine in the sun were heavy with ashes. It was as if every animal that crawled or flew knew that something holy had been lost, as if the world itself was losing its breath. The ground whispered with pain in the quiet of night. When the stars shone faintly above, the mountains, which used to be symbols of strength, groaned in their sleep, and the trees whispered sad things that only angels could hear. Men and animals cried out together, prayers, curses, and sadness all mixed together. The Nephilim's rampage had turned heaven into a graveyard. Their fights had split rivers and turned the sky red. Their feet had turned gardens into dust. People who used to be the crown of creation were now afraid of the people who were supposed to protect them. People said that the earth itself started to cry. Not a roar, but a low, steady mourning sound came from deep inside her, like a mother watching her kids hurt each other. Her tears were like storms that soaked the ground, tremors that broke the stones, and winds that howled through the valleys. These were not acts of anger, but of pain. Every drop of rain brought back memories. The day the angels came down, the first time the soil felt their feet, and the birth of beings that had torn her balance apart. The heavens, far away and bright, could no longer ignore her voice. Her sadness went beyond the clouds and stars, all the way to the courts of light where the holy ones lived. It wasn't a sound made by lips or tongues. It was the spirit of creation itself calling out to its maker. The angels, who had not fallen, heard it and stopped talking. Their song stopped in the middle of a hymn, and their wings shook because they knew what grief sounded like when it came from the earth. It was the cry of innocence lost, beauty ruined, and the world begging to be healed. One by one, the angels from heaven looked down. Their hearts grew heavy when they saw the chaos the watchers had caused. Their faces lost their light, not because they were judging, but because they were sad. They thought of their brothers, who had once been bright beings standing next to them before the throne of the Most High. Now, those same brothers walked in the dark, tied to the evil they had caused. And below them, their kids, the giants, were in constant pain and couldn't find peace in either world. The angels took the earth's cries to the presence of the Most High. They bowed in respectful silence there, where time and darkness don't exist and light has no shadow. Their voices were soft, full of sadness and awe. They said, "The earth weeps because of the sins of men and the rebellion of our brothers. Her rivers are red, and it's hard for her to breathe. Her cries rise to the sky, begging for mercy." And heaven heard. The Most High did not speak right away. The silence that came after was deeper than the oceans and bigger than the stars. The angels waited with their wings folded and their hearts still. They could sense their Creator's sadness, which wasn't anger, but love that had been hurt by betrayal. The harmony of creation had been broken, and even heaven was sad about it. The winds got restless below. The skies got darker, but there was no storm yet. It was like the world was holding its breath, not knowing if it would get mercy or judgment. The few good men who still lived in the world felt the heaviness of that silence in their hearts. Enoch was one of them. He was the man who still walked with God. He heard the earth's cry as well. He could feel her pain pulsing under his hands as he knelt down. Her heart beat slowly, and her blood was full of violence. Enoch looked up at the sky, tears running down his cheeks. His voice was soft, but the wind carried it a long way. "Lord," he whispered, "your creation groans under its weight. The sons of heaven have not kept their word. The sons of men have lost sight of their Creator. The earth can't take their sins anymore." His words joined the earth's sad song, which rose like smoke from a dying fire. The stars even looked like they were flickering with sadness. The stars that used to tell stories of hope and glory now hung dimly over a world that was falling apart. The moon, pale and hidden, watched over fields where giants walked and men hid. A mother cried for her lost child somewhere in the distance, and her cries mixed with the wind's song. It seemed like everything in the world said one word: mercy. The Nephilim were so strong and proud that they didn't realize the ground beneath them was crying out against them. Every step they took shook the ground with pain. They had forgotten that the earth was alive, that it felt things, and that it remembered. The earth soaked up the blood, but she never forgot. The voices of the dead echoed in her mind, asking for justice. The land was no longer on their side. It was their witness. The angels bowed down again in the high places in front of the throne. They said softly, "Father of all, will this creation die? Should the corruption of a few destroy the innocent and the faithful?" But the Most High did not answer with thunder or fire. His presence, on the other hand, filled the heavens like the sound of many calm but never-ending waters. The holy ones could feel his sadness and his determination. He wouldn't leave his creation, but he also couldn't let it keep hurting. The winds on earth started to change. The sky changed color in a way that had never been seen before. It was neither dawn nor dusk, but something in between. Animals became anxious as they sensed that the balance of everything was changing. The rivers slowed down as if they were stopping to listen. The mountains, which were old and didn't move, seemed to lean in closer to hear what heaven might decide. Enoch felt a strange peace come over him as he prayed. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he could tell that the voice of the earth had been heard. He felt deep down in his heart that mercy and judgment were about to meet, not in anger but in a new way. The night became quiet. Not a single leaf moved, and not a single animal called. It felt like the whole world was waiting, listening for the voice of God to answer. The angels stood ready above, their wings spread wide, ready for what needed to be done. The earth shook again, but this time it wasn't from war. It was from the heavy breath of hope. And then, without a sound, the skies opened. The sky was so quiet that it felt almost holy, as if the stars were holding their breath. The world below was full of sadness, and the cries of the innocent could be heard on winds that reached the gates of heaven. In the middle of all that grief and the sound of hearts breaking, one man walked quietly on the earth, Enoch. He wasn't a warrior, a king, or someone known for his strength. He was a peaceful man, and it seemed like his footsteps softly echoed between two worlds, one of dust and one of eternal light. Enoch built a bond of love with his Creator instead of stone monuments like other people did. Each morning, as the sun rose over the hills, he looked up, not scared, but in awe, as if he could hear heaven's whisper in the breeze that touched his face. Enoch's life wasn't full of big events. It was full of quiet. At dusk, he would walk through the fields, his heart quietly talking to the unseen. Heaven heard it, even though his neighbors couldn't. When the earth was heavy with sin, when the rivers were stained with the blood of the innocent, and when the Watcher's forbidden teachings had spread darkness among people, God looked down on the earth, looking for a soul that was still clean and still listening. Only one heart among the many beat in time with his own. It was Enoch's, as the sky turned gold and indigo one evening. The world around him seemed to fade into a strange, soft silence. The wind even stopped, as if it were waiting. Then, light began to come down from the clouds. At first it was soft, but then it got brighter, like a gentle dawn blooming in the night. Enoch looked up, and at that moment, he felt the air hum with a presence that was bigger than anything he had ever known. A voice, not too loud or scary, called his name. It spoke as if it had always known him, as if every step he had ever taken had brought him to this moment. He didn't run. He didn't try to hide. His heart didn't shake with fear. It shook with recognition. He heard peace in that voice, the kind of peace that no storm could ever take away. The world around him started to glow, as if heaven and earth were merging into one. His feet no longer touched the ground. His body became lighter and weightless, as if gravity itself had given in to divine will. The stars sparkled like open eyes, watching the Creator and creation come together again. The light wrapped around Enoch, making him feel warm and alive. People said that the light was so bright that shadows ran away from it. Mountains bent down in awe of its light, and even the clouds moved aside as if to make way for a king. But Enoch wasn't a king. He was a friend of God, not chosen for power, but for purity. The same hands that made the stars now reached for him, and the same voice that created worlds now gave him a job that would last forever. Heaven's throne had heard the Watcher's sins. People had heard the cries of the earth. The relationship between heaven and humanity had been broken, but mercy still remained. God wouldn't let the world end without a witness, someone who could stand between divine justice and human weakness. Enoch, the quiet man who walked with God, was picked to be that bridge as he climbed. Visions opened up in front of him like light doors. He saw things that flesh and blood eyes could never see. Mountains made of fire, rivers that sparkled with souls, and halls filled with angel music whose wings shone brighter than dawn. He saw the stars moving in their proper paths and the big tablets of destiny that had been written with God's will. He was shown the order that lies behind chaos and the pattern that lies within sorrow. And above it all, the Most High sat in glory, dressed in a light that words could never describe. A voice from the heavens echoed around him. It was neither harsh nor soft, but steady like the heartbeat of the universe. Enoch, son of Jared, faithful among men, see the weight of the world's sorrow. You are the one I have chosen to speak for the people who can't speak for themselves, and to bring my words to the people who are lost. You will see what happens to the Watchers and tell those who still want to know me the secrets of heaven. Enoch bowed his head in respect as he heard those words. The voice didn't roar, it calmed. It didn't talk about anger first. It talked about healing. It told of a time when the hearts of men would be filled with light again and the wounds of the earth would be healed. But it also talked about judgment, not to kill, but to clean. Enoch also knew that his journey would not be easy, but it would have a purpose. He looked down on the world he knew, with its sleepy villages, silver ribbons of rivers, and distant mountains whose peaks touched the sky. He thought about the faces of his people, not knowing that the heavens were about to move again. He loved them for their struggles and their fragile hope. That love was stronger than fear and doubt. So he agreed. The light took him higher with just one word, yes. The stars seemed to whisper his name, and the winds sang around him. The lines between heaven and earth became so blurry that they were no longer there. When Enoch entered the presence of the Eternal, time itself seemed to bow. One of its own had crossed the line between life and death, and the world below would never be the same again. People who looked for him later found only silence, which is what happens to someone who has been taken, not lost. The light started where his footprints ended. Even though hundreds of years would pass and kingdoms would rise and fall, the story of Enoch, the man who walked with God, would live on like a soft echo. The world that was left behind was full of wonder, even though his mission had just begun. Heaven had spoken again for the first time in generations, and it had chosen the most humble hearts to listen. The air was clear and bright, like glass. Enoch felt himself rise through layers of light that seemed to go on forever. Each wave of light was softer than the last. He had left the world of clay and stone far behind. The ground below him was getting smaller, like a dream he had forgotten. The silence wasn't empty. It was alive, breathing, warm, and still. When he first entered the first heaven, the air smelled like nothing else on earth. It was like rain mixed with light, cool and sweet on the soul. The stars here were closer together, and they burned with a quiet intelligence. Their light pulsed like the heartbeat of creation. There were huge fields of shining grass below him, and each blade showed a different constellation. Angels moved among them like whispers, making sure that the morning stars rose and fell at the right times and taking care of the flow of the skies. They looked at Enoch with calm fire in their eyes, as if they had been waiting for him since the beginning. He went up higher, carried by a flow of light, and entered the second heaven. The light here was colder and had silver and blue edges. He saw what looked like deep oceans of wind, big streams of air that flowed like water and carried voices that hummed in languages older than the stars. There were spirits waiting for judgment and beings who had lost their way between the worlds in those tides of air. They didn't cry or scream. Instead, they floated in silence, their sadness never ending. Angels with sad faces watched over them, their wings wrapping around the dead like they were offering comfort. Enoch felt a strange peace and a tremor of sadness inside him, as if he was seeing mercy even in the coldest parts of heaven. The climb went on, and soon the air turned to gold. The third heaven opened up in front of him like a slow-motion sunrise. Under a sky that pulsed with divine light, there were mountains of crystal and rivers of living fire. The rivers didn't burn with destruction. They burned with cleansing of fire that cleaned instead of eating. Enoch could see shapes in it, like souls being washed in light and their burdens melting away. Gardens that looked like nothing else on earth stretched out across the horizon, and the trees in them had fruit that glowed softly from the inside. The leaves shone in time with the music, each one a note in a never-ending heavenly song. Angels here didn't sing with words. They sang with their breath. Their voices came together to make the heartbeat of paradise. Enoch felt like his spirit was getting bigger and bigger and couldn't fit inside his body anymore. There was light in every part of him. He floated even higher into the fourth heaven, where day and night began. There he saw huge chariots of light racing through the empty space. The sun, the moon, and the stars were all guided by angels who used gestures that were too graceful to put into words. He saw the spirits of dawn and dusk standing at the edges of the horizon like time's guards. Every moment here was in perfect balance, like a cosmic rhythm kept going by unseen hands. When Enoch looked down, he saw the earth far below. The oceans sparkled like drops of glass. At that moment, he understood that every sunrise, every moonrise, and every change in the stars were not accidents, but acts of devotion carried out by beings who were always patient. The air changed again when the light took him to the fifth heaven. It got thinner, quieter, and almost breakable. Under a sky of soft violet light, there were huge plains. Angels stood in groups, their faces turned toward the Most High, and they were very quiet. With their wings folded close and their eyes shining with deep respect, they stood. These were the watchers who had not fallen. They had resisted the urge to look down on the daughters of men when their brothers did. Their sadness was still there, but it had become a kind of holy strength. Enoch felt small in front of them, but they bowed as he passed. Not to worship him, but to show that they knew he had a job to do from the Eternal One. The stillness in this place was holy. Even thoughts felt like sounds that were too loud to be spoken. He also went to the sixth heaven, a place where everything was always moving and the structure of the universe itself seemed to come to life. Here, angels measured the paths of stars, wrote down people's fates, and made the laws that govern life that we can't see. He saw libraries made of light, where scrolls floated in the air and glowed with words written in fire. Not in form, but in purpose. The angels here were huge. They moved slowly, and their gestures made constellations and paths through time. One person looked at Enoch and smiled, a smile that held eternity. "Look," the being said without speaking, "everything sings in harmony, for nothing is without design." Enoch's heart trembled with awe. He saw how mercy and justice were connected, and how even the smallest breeze on earth had meaning in the pattern of heaven. Finally, light that he had never seen before began to gather above him. It wasn't bright or blinding, but it was endless. The seventh heaven opened up like a quiet dawn. There were no walls, floors, or space between things. It was just being. There was an endless sea of crystal that reflected the glory of the one who sat on the throne of light. There were countless hosts of cherubim with wings of sapphire, and seraphim whose voices were the very definition of harmony around the throne. The air was so holy that even time seemed to bow down to it. Enoch couldn't move. He could only be in that light. It felt like love so big that it could make sorrow go away. In that world, silence wasn't the lack of sound. It was the sound of everything resting. Enoch saw rivers that looked like liquid glass, flowing from under the throne and down through the lower heavens to keep all life going. He saw the burning mountains of judgment, which were far away but still alive, with their fire clean and watching. He saw the angels of mercy kneeling next to them, making sure that even judgment was full of love. The throne itself was light upon light, and it was layered so deeply that no human language could describe it. The one who sat on it was formless and surrounded by colors that had no name on earth. Enoch couldn't fully lift his eyes, but he felt a peace so great that it drowned out all of his memories of fear and pain. There was a voice in the room, but it wasn't like thunder. It was more like the calm after it. It didn't speak in words. It spoke in presence. And in that moment, Enoch knew everything he needed to know. How heavy grace is, how creation flows, and how patient God is. The 7 realms shone together as he stood there, each one breathing into the next, like notes in a single song. Enoch felt himself becoming a part of that harmony, as if his being was stretching through all of existence. The stars didn't seem far away anymore. They were brothers singing the same song of praise. He finally understood what it meant to really walk with God. It wasn't on the ground, but in the heart of everything that was and would ever be. There was no sky above him or ground below him, only a never-ending sea of light. The air itself was alive, shaking gently with power that couldn't be held back. Enoch was in the middle of it, and the light that surrounded him seemed to know him. There were no shadows here because the light came from everywhere and everything. It moved like a thought, a breath, or music that didn't have sound. His spirit shook, not from fear but from a respect that was too big to fit in his body. The throne rose before him. It wasn't built or put there. It was the very center of creation. It shone like a diamond that was melting. Its light was soft and gentle, but it never went out. Its fire was cold and soft like snow. There were waves of light all around it, and each one had colors that no one could name. There were many beings around it, including seraphim with wings that burned with living flame, cherubim with faces that showed deep wonder, and thrones that shone like mirrors of the divine will. They sang without moving their lips, and their voices made a vibration that made the whole world pulse with harmony. It wasn't a song. It was the sound of life recognizing its creator. The closer Enoch got, the more he felt his human side fade away into something lighter and purer. All of his memories, thoughts, and worries fell away like dust in the sun. He didn't know if he was walking or if the eternal was pulling him forward. The light got thicker and wrapped around him in gold and white ribbons. It wasn't heat that pressed down on him. It was the weight of holiness. When he finally got to the space in front of the throne, time seemed to stop. There was no start or end. The air shook, and out of that silence came a presence that Enoch had never felt before. It was love, so big that it was hard to understand, but it burned with the purity of judgment. The light around the throne got deeper and spread through all the colors of creation. Then, from inside it, a sound came out. It wasn't words, but resonance. It went through Enoch's bones, spirit, and whole being. The voice of God spoke. There were no syllables, but Enoch understood what it said. You didn't hear it with your ears. You heard it with your soul. It was like the whole universe was talking at once, in a soft and loud voice, kind and unyielding. The words were like wind and fire together, and they made sense to him. Tell the watchers, ... You will have no peace. The moment felt like it would last forever. Not a shout, but a whisper of power so great that even the stars bowed down in silence. The seraphim stopped singing and folded their wings. A vibration went through the heavens, carrying the order to every part of creation. Enoch felt it move through him, out of him, and across worlds. It was the sound of God speaking justice into existence. The light around the throne flared up, and for a moment he saw visions inside it. The fallen ones tied up in grief, their eyes turned up in fear, mountains breaking apart under their feet and seas shaking, because of how guilty they feel. But there was sadness even in that order. God's voice didn't rage. It cried. The fall of the Watchers was not the victory of anger, but the sadness of a father who had seen his own creations turn away from his love. The silence that came after was full of that pain. Enoch stood there, shaking, with a mix of awe and sadness in his heart. He could feel the angels around him crying without tears. Their faces were hidden behind wings that glowed like white fire. They also felt the pain of judgment, the pain that comes from having to do what is right. Enoch felt the light from the throne come toward him as the decree hung in the air. It wasn't blinding, but it was warmer flame that filled him with the message he was meant to deliver. He saw visions unfold before him, not as pictures, but as knowledge. He saw the Watchers' faces, which had once been bright with holiness, but were now dark with regret. He saw the giants' kids walking around the world, hungry and sad. He heard the cries of people rise like smoke, filling the skies with sadness. And through it all, he saw God's heart, steady, sad, and merciful even when he was angry. The light pulsed again, and Enoch heard the voice again, this time softer and closer than his own breathing. You will tell what you have seen. You will bring the words of heaven down to earth. The cries of men have reached my gates, and the earth itself groans beneath their blood. The words didn't echo. They stayed inside him, alive and forever. Enoch bowed, but he wasn't sure if he still had a body to bow with. He felt himself melt into that light, becoming one with it, until there was no line between him and the will that filled the sky. The angels around him started to move again. Their wings opened up like the dawn after a long night. They sang hymns of solemn beauty, not happy songs. Their voices rose and fell like waves, and each note was full of sadness and obedience. They were seeing judgment, but not on people in general, only on their own family. But they didn't ask any questions, because they knew what Enoch now knew, that the Eternal's justice was not cruel, but restorative. Even anger had a reason, and even punishment had mercy. The air was full of light that seemed to breathe, and from the edges of the throne flowed rivers of light that stretched out and down through the lower heavens. Each stream carried the order and made it part of the world. The stars dimmed in grief wherever it went, and the spirits bowed their heads in silence. Enoch felt the vibration move through him again, the steady hum of God's will pushing on every level. He could feel the Watchers far below, restless, knowing their fate long before they would hear it spoken by a human. He looked up at the throne again for a moment. The light there seemed endless, the kind that didn't burn but showed things. He could almost see the very essence of life inside it, but not a face or a shape. It was as if everything, every star, every piece of dust, and every beating heart were all inside that light. Enoch realized that the judgment itself came from love, a love that would not let creation fall into corruption. This time, the voice came to comfort instead of command. Don't be afraid. I'm with you. Your task will be heavy, but my spirit will be with you. Those words made him feel so calm that his soul stopped shaking. He felt a light fall on his shoulders, like a cloak. It was invisible, but heavy with meaning. Angels whispered his name, and it moved through the air like a breeze as he stood there. The throne got brighter, and he could see beyond the light. He could see time itself bending around the will of the Eternal. He saw the flood that would wash the earth clean, the mountains that would one day hold chains of burning darkness, and the promise of restoration that would come after judgment. He saw that every angry act had the potential to lead to forgiveness. The silence came back, but it wasn't empty this time. It was full of the sound of creation at rest. Enoch bent his head and couldn't talk or think. He could only be. The light of the angels around him grew softer, like stars fading into dawn. The voice didn't say anything else. It didn't need to. The message was now inside him, carved into the beat of his soul. And as the light began to fade into a softer glow, he knew that the moment had passed. But the echo of those words, "You shall have no peace," would last forever, ringing in the hearts of both angels and men. When Enoch got back, the wind was calm. The world hadn't changed, but it felt completely different under his feet. The clouds in the sky were thick and dim, and they sounded like voices from far away. He had walked through heaven, stood in front of the throne, and now he was walking among the dust and breath of people again. But his steps were no longer human. His skin seemed to shimmer faintly, and it smelled like light from far away. The mountains bowed in silence as he passed, their peaks hidden in a quiet haze. The air followed him like a prayer that was shaking. He had not come of his own free will. He had been sent, and the words that burned like fire in his chest were heavy. The command of the Eternal still echoed through him, soft and immovable. "Tell the watchers, you shall have no peace." It was not a message of anger, but of sadness. Not a curse born from wrath, but a truth woven into the order of creation itself. Enoch felt the sadness of heaven and the grief of the Most High pressing down on him. He had seen beauty that couldn't be put into words, and now he had to face the people who had thrown it away. The valley below Mount Hermon was dark. The mist moved over the stones like spirits moving slowly, and the trees stood still, their leaves not moving as if they were holding their breath. There the watchers came together, 200 beings who used to shine brighter than the dawn, but were now covered in a dim light that flickered like dying embers. Their eyes no longer held the beauty of heaven, but the deep pain of memory. The ground below them pulsed softly, as if it too could feel their pain. When Enoch showed up, they all turned to him at once, and for the first time since they had come down, there was silence among them. They were aware of who he was, not by his face, not by his form, but by the stillness that surrounded him, the same stillness that once filled the courts of heaven. His presence didn't blind them, but it did make their wings shake. The faint light that stuck to him made them think of what they had lost. At first, he didn't say anything. The air between them was thick, and the sound of the wind was drowned out by the weight of time. Then their leader, Semiezer, came forward. His voice was soft, broken, and full of desire. "Enoch," he said, his voice shaking like a leaf in the wind, "you walk with the Most High. You have seen his face. You have talked in his light. Please, we beg you, please let us find mercy." The others followed, their voices overlapping in sadness. They weren't crying out of pride or anger. They were crying out of desperation. These were not the powerful angels who came down with thunder. These were fallen beings who were tired, scared, and empty. They knelt on the ground with their wings spread out like ripped clothes, and they hid their faces in shame. Some cried without tears, while others looked up to heaven as if they were looking for the light they used to know. Enoch listened with a heavy heart. Their voices were like echoes of the glory of the past, a faint hint of who they used to be. And even though their rebellion had caused destruction on earth giants, bloodshed and sorrow, there was still a hint of the divine in them. He could feel it, though it was weak and not gone. For a moment, he felt compassion in his own heart. He wanted to say something comforting, but the command inside him wouldn't let him. He didn't come to speak from the heart. He came to speak from God's will. He looked up at the sky, where clouds were gathering like veils of mourning. His voice, when it came, was quiet and low. It wasn't loud enough to shake the mountains, but it was loud enough for the air to listen. He said, "The Most High has heard the cries of the earth. He has seen the blood of men on the ground, the tears of mothers, and the pain of children. He has seen what your hands have done to the world. He sent me to tell you this. You will not have peace." The words moved through the air like thunder that was going slowly. The ground shook under them. The watchers bowed their heads even lower, and their wings wrapped around them as if to hide from the noise. Some people started to cry softly, and their cries echoed off the rocks. Others looked at Enoch with shocked faces and deep sadness that seemed to go on forever. They had hoped that heaven's mercy would still reach them, but the order was final. Semiezer knelt down. He broke down as he spoke again. "We taught them what we knew, the secrets of heaven, the beauty of stars, how to shape metal, and how to heal. We didn't want it to end this way. The world was new, and we were drawn to its light. Have we fallen so low that we can't even show mercy?" Enoch's heart raced, but the voice inside him stayed quiet. He said softly, "God's mercy is not withheld, but peace must come after justice. You have brought evil where there was good. You have turned knowledge into a weapon. You have seen the earth's pain, and the earth itself cries out against you." The air around them changed as he spoke. A weak vibration spread through the valley. The clouds got thicker and darker, and their edges glowed faintly, as if they were lit from within. A voice that was big and silent seemed to move through the fog, not in words, but in presence. The watchers felt it and shook. It was the Eternal's silent gaze, which was there but not seen. Everyone and everything felt it. Even the wind stopped. Enoch raised his hands to the sky. There was a faint light around him that was soft and silver, like moonlight on water. His eyes were calm, but they were full of sadness. He said, "The order has been given. You will be bound in the valleys of the earth and sealed in darkness until the time of judgment. Your sons, the giants that came from your rebellion, will die because of their own violence. The land will be clean, and the sky will cry for you." A murmur went through the watchers, some of them sad and some of them not believing what they had seen. One of them, a being that once shone with blue fire, whispered, "Is there no intercession left? Will his heart not be moved by the prayers of men?" Enoch looked at them, and for a moment his eyes softened. He said softly, "Even now his heart aches for you. But you have to deal with what has been said. The earth will rest, and heaven will be at peace once more. Your time of glory is over, but his mercy will last forever, even if you aren't in it anymore." The watchers stopped talking. The only sound left was the soft rustle of wings and the low sigh of the wind. A single beam of light broke through the clouds above them and fell on the spot where Enoch stood. It touched the ground at his feet and spread across the stones like gold. It looked like heaven itself was crying for a moment. Enoch turned slowly, his heart heavy and his face calm. The order had been given, and the message had been sent. The watchers stayed bowed behind him, their wings folded close, and their cries faded into the mist. The silence that came after was not empty. It was the silence of heaven itself, the stillness of divine sorrow watching over the ruins of rebellion. The valley got dark again. The light that had touched the ground started to fade, like memory sinking into the ground. Enoch walked away without making a sound, and his shape blended into the fog. He didn't look back because the weight inside him was already too much. The message of judgment had been spoken, and its echo would last through the ages. It was a whisper carried by time and the wind, reminding every heart that heaven weeps even when it punishes. The giants' land was dark when night fell. The air itself seemed heavy with their presence, huge shadows that crossed valleys and rivers. The children of angels and mortals, born strong but full of sadness. The stars above twinkled softly, as if their light didn't want to touch the ground. Those were the days when the giants started having strange dreams that scared them so much that their huge hearts shook. They saw the end of everything while they slept. They had dreams of mountains breaking apart, stones crying out in pain, and rivers of fire flowing through the ground. They saw the oceans rise like angry ghosts, swallowing cities and forests under waves that glowed with moonlight and sadness. They imagined winds ripping through the sky and bending trees like blades of grass. They also imagined the sun getting dimmer, as if it didn't want to see what was coming. They heard the cries of men and animals in their dreams, sounds that went deep into their souls. The world felt strange when they woke up. The air was cooler, the ground shook a little, and the birds stopped singing their morning songs. The giants looked at each other, and fear flashed in their eyes for the first time. They felt small for the first time, not in size, but in their fate. The powerful sons of the Watchers, who thought they were invincible, were shaken by visions of their own deaths. Their bodies were so strong that their steps shook the ground, but the dreams made them shake inside, and they were haunted by visions of fire and water, and their own strength turned against them. They started talking to each other, and their voices echoed across the valleys like thunder. "What have we seen?" asked one, his voice full of fear. "Are these dreams from the Most High? Are we doomed to fall like our fathers did?" Another person said, "The heavens are quiet, but the earth cries out beneath us. Maybe the end has already been written." Every night, the dreams came back. Some people saw the skies split open and rain floods on the ground. Others saw angels coming down with chains of light, their faces cold and hard. The youngest of them, who was even taller than the trees, started to cry in their sleep. Once a source of pride, their strength now felt like a burden they couldn't bear. Every morning, their hands shook as they woke up, and the memories of their dreams clung to them like fog. They were scared and confused. So they looked to Enoch, the one man who had walked between heaven and earth. People had told them about him through the wind. They knew he had talked to the Most High and lived. Some people said he had stood in front of the throne of light and come back unharmed. The giants didn't see Enoch as a person. They saw him as a bridge, a weak hope that maybe, just maybe, heaven would hear them through him. So they sent messengers who were tall and serious, with faces that showed both power and fear. Enoch didn't run away when he saw them coming, even though their footsteps shook the ground. He stood still, and the calmness of his presence broke the tension in the air. The giants knelt in front of him, their voices low and full of sadness. The first person to speak was Marway, who was born from the angel Barakweel wheel. "We have seen the end," Marway said, his voice like thunder in the distance. "In our dreams, the mountains fall, the oceans rise, and the sky itself burns. We see the waters eating our brothers. We see fire coming down from heaven. We see our power turn to dust. What does this mean, man of God? Will the earth kill us? Has heaven already made a decision about us?" Enoch looked at them with eyes that had seen both good and bad things. He wasn't scared of how big they were. He was scared of how sad they were. He could feel their pain creatures stuck between heaven and earth, cursed by their birth and their inheritance. The Most High gave them dreams that were more than just fantasies. They were warnings. The destruction they had seen was not yet upon them, but it was coming, carried on the breath of divine justice. He spoke softly, and the wind carried his voice. He said, "Your dreams are real. They don't come from fear. They come from prophecy. The earth will really rise up against you. The mountains will fall, and the floods will come. Your hands have caused so much violence that it has reached heaven, and the cries of the innocent have been heard. Your fathers, the watchers, have begged for mercy, but the Eternal's word stands. You will have no peace." The giants bent down, and their shadows grew long on the ground. Some hit the ground in pain, and their tears made rivers in the soil. "But we didn't ask to be born," one of them yelled. "We didn't choose to bear this curse. We were made because they wanted us, not because we wanted to be. Do we have to die for their sins?" Enoch's heart shook. The wind gently moved around them, bringing with it the smell of rain. He said, "The Most High is just. He sees your pain, but he also sees the pain that your hands cause. Your violence is too much for the world to handle. The earth's blood wants things to be in balance. I won't turn down your request, but I can't promise to be kind. I will go and talk for you." Hope flickered among them, like a candle in a storm. They saw Enoch turn his face to the sky, his eyes far away, as if he were already walking in another world. The giants knelt down again and put their huge hands on the ground in respect. They begged him to take their words to the Most High, not to defend them, but to ask for understanding. As the moon rose over the horizon that night, the giants met in silence. Their dreams came back, but this time the pictures were clearer. They saw Enoch standing in front of them in a huge sea of light. They saw him raise his hands in prayer, and the winds calmed down. But they could still see the waters rising behind, impatient, unstoppable, and unavoidable. The dreams didn't just talk about destruction. They also talked about how sad heaven was for them. Some of the giants woke up crying, and their huge bodies shook the ground. Others sat quietly, looking up at the stars. They couldn't avoid what was coming, but it was comforting to know that one man, a mortal, would take their cry to heaven. It was a strange peace, real but fragile, not because they hoped to live, but because they were heard. Enoch left not long after. He walked through the valleys, and the starlight gave him a faint glow. The giants behind him watched in silence until he was gone over the hills. For a long time, they didn't say anything. The air felt thicker, and the world seemed quieter, as if God was waiting for an answer. It was hard to sleep well for the next few nights. Some giants stopped sleeping altogether because they were scared of what the next dream would show. Others kept watch at the tops of mountains and the edges of rivers, looking for signs in the sky. The animals stayed away from them because they could feel the tension that ran through their huge bodies. It felt like even the winds were telling them that something big and final was coming. The dreams showed them what strength couldn't protect them from, the Creator's hand moving toward judgment. And even though they were very powerful beings, their hearts were like those of children, scared, lost, and waiting for the words that would decide their fate. Moe flew through a sky that didn't belong to the earth on the wind. Mountains below him curved like the backs of sleeping animals, and rivers wound through the dark like silver ribbons. He was one of the giants, a son of the Watcher, Barakwile. But unlike the others, his heart had grown quiet with sadness. The dreams had been non-stop, Visions of waters swallowing the world, stars shaking in their places, and light so bright it burned through the clouds. Each dream felt less like a fantasy and more like a memory, something that had already been written down in the deep pages of time. Maui got up from where he had been sitting among the stones and looked up at the stars in the quiet. Time between night and dawn, they pulsed weakly, like hearts that were almost breathing. He felt a pull, not from inside himself, but from above, like invisible hands pulling him up. He wasn't sure if he was awake or dreaming, but his spirit started to rise, and the world below him faded away like an echo. The valleys, rivers, and even the distant mountains disappeared behind clouds until all that was left was the sky and the hum of creation, which sounded like music too old for words. He was taken even higher, past the clouds and the blue horizon, to a place that sparkled like glass. Time didn't move there. It drifted. There was no one source of light. It lived in everything. Maui saw huge towers of fire that didn't burn or eat anything. He saw rivers of light flowing through what looked like air, but they sang softly as if they were alive. There were beings around him that he couldn't see. They were gentle and made him feel both calm and amazed. He couldn't see their faces, but he could feel their eyes on him, as if heaven itself was watching his shaking soul. He reached out, not sure what he wanted, and something strange appeared in front of him, a huge, shining tablet that floated in the air without any weight. The surface was smooth like water, but the letters inside moved and sparkled like living fire. As he looked at the symbols, they changed, moving from one shape to another and showing pictures instead of words. He saw visions flash across its surface, huge waves crashing on the land, mountains bending, and stars falling from the sky like drops of molten gold. And in the middle of the storm of pictures, there was only one sound, the low hum of judgment getting closer. The tablet got brighter, and Maui's reflection showed up on it, but it didn't look like him. He saw himself kneeling in the middle of ruins, holding the bodies of his brothers under a dark sky. The water had risen above his knees, and he could see chains of light coming down through the storm from above. His heart hurt. He understood what it meant without saying anything. The giants' time was coming to an end, and their dreams had not lied. He wanted to turn away and run back to the world below, but the light held him gently, like a parent holding a child. A voice spoke from the light. It wasn't loud, but it was huge, like the sound of the sky itself. "Maui, son of the fallen, you have come looking for what has already been said. The flood will wash away the evil on earth because the innocent have cried out to the throne. The violence of people like you has upset the balance of creation, but your journey is not in vain. The Most High has heard your fear and will not forget your sorrow." Maui put his head down. His heart shook like a leaf in the wind. "Then there is no mercy for us," he said softly, his voice small against the great silence. The light got a little dimmer, like the world was tired. The voice said, "Mercy is not gone, but it can't live next to what your fathers did. The world needs to sleep before it can be born again. You will come back and tell what you saw. You will tell them that the waters are coming, not just out of anger, but to wash away what has been lost." Maui reached for the shining tablet as it began to fade, wanting to keep its warmth. When his fingers touched it, pieces of light broke off and entered him. He could feel them moving inside him, both burning and calming him at the same time. He saw pictures in his head of the faces of men, women, and children who would one day be born from Noah's line. In the soft morning light, he saw a world that had been reborn, untouched and quiet, with the waters calm again. And for the first time, he got it. Destruction wasn't the end. It was the deep breath before creation started up again. The sky became quiet. The light around him faded into darkness, and he could hear wings fluttering somewhere. He couldn't see them, big, soft, and eternal. He felt himself slowly falling, as if invisible hands were lowering him. The sky broke up into layers of clouds, then into mist, and finally into the thick air that surrounds the earth. The air was warm and full of the smell of dirt and rain when his feet hit the ground again. His heart still echoed with what he had seen, and his eyes still shone with the memory of that otherworldly light. He was standing by a river, where the water moved slowly under the light of a pale moon. It was as if the world was listening, and it was very quiet. The other giants were spread out across the land, not at ease. When they saw Moe come back, they all gathered around him, their huge bodies bending low and their eyes full of questions they couldn't ask. Moe raised his hand and spoke softly, almost shaking. He said, "I went where no human eye can see. I saw the sky open up, and a tablet of light was shown to me. It talked without making a sound, but I got it. The floods are coming. The oceans will rise and the mountains will bow. Our memory will be washed away from the earth." The giants whispered to each other, and their voices sounded like thunder from far away. Some people looked up at the sky as if they could already see the storm coming. "Was there hope, Moe?" one person asked. "Did heaven give us any tools to fight against what is to come?" Moe looked down. "No," he said, and his words were full of quiet truth. "There is no way to get away from what has been written, but there is peace in knowing that the end brings new beginnings. The waters don't come to hurt us. They come to heal what has been hurt." His brothers stopped talking. For the first time, no one yelled or argued. The trees whispered softly in the wind, and the smell of rain seemed to get closer with every breath. The stars above them flickered like lamps that were shaking, and the ground below them seemed to hum softly, as if it were remembering the beat of heaven. That night, Moe sat by the river all by herself. He could still feel the light's warmth inside him, faint but real, like a seed buried deep in the heart of winter. He looked in the water and saw his reflection. It wasn't the huge warrior he had been, it was something smaller, quieter, and almost human. His eyes were full of memories of his trip, like a dream that wouldn't go away. The river kept moving in front of him, flowing toward a sea he couldn't see. He wondered if the waves were already starting to rise beyond the horizon. Enoch looked up at the sky when it was still night. The stars above him twinkled like watchful eyes, countless and patient, each one holding a secret that only heaven knew. The air itself seemed to be holding its breath. The grass at his feet whispered softly because of the heavy silence. A light began to fall softly, not blindingly, but gently, cleanly, and with life. It didn't come quickly like lightning or fire. It came slowly like dawn waking up the soul. Enoch felt a presence in that light that had no shape or boundary but filled the whole world. A voice came from that presence. It was calm, vast, and steady like the sea that never ends. It didn't speak with words. It spoke with the sound of knowing. It said, "Enoch, son of Jared, write down everything you have seen, everything that has happened, and everything that is going to happen. Write down every cry of the earth and every whisper of heaven so that no one forgets." And in front of him was a tablet that was huge, smooth, and shiny like polished stone, but it wasn't made by people. It floated in the air without any weight, and its surface pulsed gently, as if it were alive. The letters that formed on it glowed like threads of molten gold, but they moved as he watched, changing into pictures, memories, and echoes of time. The light from the tablet touched Enoch's face, and he could feel its warmth sink into his skin and bones. It felt like his breath was moving with the rhythm of creation. He started to write. Even though he was in awe, his hand did not shake. The stylus he held wasn't made of wood or stone. It was a narrow beam of light that came from the center of the tablet. It went wherever his mind went, carving words into the glowing surface that burned softly but left no ash, dust, or sound. He wrote about the watchers, how they fell, how beautiful they were, and how sad it was when they didn't listen. He wrote about the knowledge they gave and the crafts that corrupted people's innocence. He wrote about the giants whose laughter shook the hills and whose hunger darkened the earth. Each line sparkled for a moment before sinking into the tablet, as if the very fabric of heaven had swallowed his words whole. He could feel the weight of every name he wrote down, each sin, each cry, and each plea that had made it to the throne. The stars above seemed to flicker in response, as if they were listening to the story being written down for all time. The time lost its meaning. He couldn't tell if days or just moments had passed. The air around him shimmered a little, and the ground beneath his feet glowed with the light of God. He realized that the night hadn't changed when his hand finally stopped moving. It was still as if all of creation was waiting for his last word. He looked at what he had written and saw a history that was both beautiful and sad, a reflection of heaven's justice and earth's broken desire. The voice spoke again, this time more softly, like a breath moving through him. Seal what you have written, because the time for it to be revealed has not yet come. Let the words sit in silence until the right time comes to speak them. Enoch lowered his head. "How do I seal the words, Lord?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. And then a sign appeared in front of him. It was a mark that no known language could make. It was round and went on forever. It was made up of lines of light that twisted and turned like living fire. The voice said, "This is the seal of memory. No hand can open what heaven has closed, and no shadow can touch what has been marked by light." He drew the symbol on the tablet, and as he did, the golden writing on the surface sank deeper and glowed, brighter, making the whole slab pulse like a beating heart. The seal spread out over it, wrapping it in a soft glow that seemed to hum like a lullaby from heaven. The light got brighter and then softer until it looked like plain stone again, smooth and pale, but its silence held the weight of everything that was written inside. Enoch felt weak, but a calmness came over him like a soft blanket. He looked at the sealed tablet and felt the divine presence around him. It seemed like the stars above were bending down to see. Their light shook a little, and he could see it in his eyes. He couldn't help but think of the generations yet to come, who would walk the same earth but not know the great story that was hidden in the heavens. He wondered if they would also one day look up at the stars and feel that strange pull toward something they couldn't understand. The winds started to blow gently through the valley, bringing with it the smell of cedar and dust. Enoch knelt next to the glowing tablet and put his hand on it. He felt warmth under his palm, like a living pulse that was slow and steady. He said, "May these words serve as a witness between heaven and earth." The tablet didn't respond with sound, but with a faint tremor of light, as if it were agreeing with his prayer. The sky seemed to open up again far above him, and a single beam of light came down, wrapping Enoch and the tablet in a soft glow. The stars got dimmer around it, and the mountains made long, quiet shadows on the plain. The voice spoke again, but this time it was to comfort, not to command. Enoch, your record is full. You have written the truth about both heaven and earth. The seal is in place, and the order stands. Enoch shut his eyes. Now the world seemed different, quieter and deeper. He could feel the heartbeat of creation under the surface of things, the harmony that held all life together but could not be seen. Every sin he had written and every name he had written had a place in that rhythm. Nothing was left out. There was no loss. He saw the tablet slowly rise from the ground when he opened his eyes. It rose silently, weightlessly, and slowly spun in the air. It floated higher and higher until it disappeared into the star's light. There was a faint circle of light on the ground where it had been, which was the echo of its leaving. For a long time, Enoch stood in that quiet. His hands glowed faintly, still showing the light that had gone through him. He looked up and felt the weight of heaven and earth in his heart. The stars above seemed to move and change, making shapes that looked like writing across the sky. He couldn't read the words, but the patterns made him feel calm and amazed. He took a deep breath and started to walk, feeling the dust beneath his feet. The faint glow on the ground behind him faded away, leaving only silence. The sky was wide and clear, and it held the memory of a single man who had written the decree of heaven and sealed it forever in the quiet of light. There was a stillness in the air that felt almost alive. It pushed against the world, holding the weight of something holy and final. The watchers were led down into the silence of judgment below the huge mountains where there was no wind and no light. There were no more cries, no more defiance, and no more fire in their once bright forms. There was only a faint shimmer of fading glory behind them, like the last flicker of stars before the dawn takes over the sky. Their fall wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, like the soft unraveling of the order of eternity being put back in place. Every step down into the depths echoed the calm, deliberate, and absolute voice of divine law. The earth seemed to open by itself, a wound in creation that took in what had once been too proud to bow. The ground didn't shake with rage. Instead, it breathed in a slow, steady rhythm, as if even the soil was sad about what it had to hide. There was no fire of anger, no storms tearing through the sky, just the soundless movement of angels carrying out the order. Their wings sparkled with pale gold, and they stood still with their eyes forward. They weren't executioners, they were keepers of balance. Chains made of light itself appeared, woven from the same light that had once crowned the watchers when they walked in glory. But now that same light was being used against them, tying them up instead of decorating them, sealing them instead of blessing them. Each link pulsed faintly, full of divine energy, not cruelly, but on purpose, as if to remind the fallen of what they used to be and could never be again. The chains glowed softly in the dark, showing the sadness on their faces. They all seemed to understand without words that this was not revenge but healing. The air got colder as they went deeper, but not because it was winter. It was because heaven's warmth was gone. They were going to a place that was not affected by day or night, a hole in the fabric of creation where time itself slowed down. The watchers could no longer see the stars above or feel the hum of life around them. The silence around them got so deep that it felt like it was pushing against their thoughts and wrapping them in eternal stillness. Without saying a word, they all knew that they wouldn't get up again until everything was made new. The mountains that would hold them captive were huge and unbroken, with roots that went deeper than anyone could see. There were rivers of quiet fire running under them. This was the energy that shaped the world, but people couldn't see it. The watchers were lowered into this dark and serious place. The chain's light shone on the walls of the cave, making patterns that looked like tears falling from the stone. The silence here was holy, the kind that made you aware of your breath, your heartbeat, and the space between what was holy and what had fallen. Azazel, their leader, bowed his head, and his wings, which had once been bright, folded and darkened. He taught people how to paint eyes, make weapons of war, and forge metals. His hands, which had caused so much trouble, were now tied up in golden fire. He didn't look angry. He looked calm and accepting. He slowly realized that the lesson he had refused to learn in heaven would now be taught in the dark. The others around him knelt in quiet acceptance, each carrying the weight of their actions like stones pressing on their hearts. Enoch stood at the edge of the mountain's mouth, looking down at the shadows that were coming down. His heart didn't shake with fear. It shook because of how deep what he saw was. It felt like the stillness of the moment was bigger than time, like everything was watching through him. "You shall have no peace," the voice of God said softly in his memory. But even in that sentence, there was more than just punishment. It was preservation, a way to keep corruption from spreading and protect what was still pure in the world. The angels who carried out the order didn't say anything. Their faces showed no signs of victory. They moved like streams of light, and their presence was both scary and calming. They put the last seals on the cave in a gentle, almost loving way. The earth closed over the watchers like a heavy blanket over souls that were restless. The light faded until everything was lost in an endless dusk. The watchers waited in the dark. They couldn't sleep because angels don't dream. They couldn't die because their essence was tied to eternity. All they could do was remember the stars laughing when they were first made, the music of the first dawn, and the moment they chose desire over obedience. Their memories were both a source of pain and a source of comfort. They played back what they had lost in silence. The sky stayed still above the earth. The stars twinkled softly, as if they knew what had happened below. Not through destruction, but through the quiet act of separation, creation had been balanced again. Justice had fallen softly like snow, and even though the world went on, there was a quiet stillness in the air, like the kind that comes after a big storm and everything is at peace. Enoch stayed there for a long time, feeling the weight of heaven's justice on his chest. He could still feel them down there, but not as evil. They were just sad. The mountains were still, their peaks touching the mist and their roots holding the dead. He wrote down everything that was shown to him, his hand steady and his heart heavy. In the fading light, every stroke of his pen glimmered, marking the words that would live on for generations, the memory of those who died, the mercy hidden in judgment, and the divine calm that comes when order is restored. Deep down in the earth, a faint hum of light still flowed through the chains. It wasn't anger or pain. It was the last breath of what was once great. It was a reminder that divine energy never really goes away, even in the dark. It changes, it stops, and it waits. The chains glowed softly in time with the heartbeat of creation, linking even the damned to heaven's order. The wind started to move again far above, brushing through the trees and whispering across the oceans and valleys. It was as if heaven itself had breathed out after a long silence, and the stars shone more brightly. The world was back to normal, not because of thunder or fire, but because of a calm that could only have come from the eternal light. The Watchers, locked up in their quiet prisons, became part of the earth's very foundation, silently witnessing the weight of divine law. Their fall was not erased. It was written into the fabric of creation as a warning, a prayer, and a truth carved in stillness. So, under the unbroken mountains, the chains of light kept shining faintly, unseen by any living eye. They were the eternal echo of justice done in silence, glowing softly in the dark. Where even judgment was peaceful, it started out like a breath, soft, slow, and oddly calm. The earth seemed to sigh as it got tired of its work. Clouds came together, not in anger but for a reason, and their edges glowed softly, as if they had been touched by something holy. The air was heavy and quiet, and for a moment everything stopped. Then the first drop fell. It was a single crystal bead from the sky that touched the ground like a blessing. That day, the world did not get hit by a storm. It was a cleansing. Not thunder, but the steady beat of rain, with each drop carrying the weight of forgiveness. The rivers started to move, waking up like the earth's sleeping veins. They grew bigger and bigger, and their waters turned into a huge, endless sea. The mist that rose from the deep slowly covered the mountains, which used to be tall and proud. The valleys were not filled with chaos, but with calm waters that sparkled in the soft light. The world became a lullaby, with the soft tapping of rain on wood, the whisper of waves against stone, and the sigh of wind across land that had just been softened. There was no anger or violence in it. Just let go. The quiet call to rest was felt by all living things. Birds that used to sing in the air stopped singing and found peace in the rising air. As the cool flood washed over their roots, the trees swayed gently, and their branches bent in surrender. The big animals on land moved slowly through the rising waters, not in a hurry, but in a strange way, as if they were following an unseen rhythm. The world was coming apart, but it didn't feel like loss. It felt like the end of a long illness, like the deep breath you take before you start to get better. The sky got darker, but not with anger. It was the soft, dim light of twilight, the soft veil that comes before peace. As the rain fell, light shone through it in thin strands, making each drop look like glass. It was like heaven was crying, but not for destruction, for renewal. The sound was kind, never-ending, and hypnotic. Every wave took away pieces of what had been broken, sending them into the deep sea where time itself seemed to sleep. The land changed under the water. The valleys were smoothed out, the stones shone, and the river's hidden paths came together to form new ones. The earth drank a lot of water, and the scars on its surface softened as the flood passed over them. The blood, cries, and broken promises of the old world faded into the vast silence, carried away by currents that seemed to hum with a divine rhythm. The air smelled fresh, with the faint sweetness of rain that cleansed the earth. The ark floated like a dream above the rising waters, safe from the chaos below. It wasn't just a wooden boat. It was a cradle of hope that floated on God's breath. It was warm and quiet inside. The hum of life was soft but steady, like the low breathing of animals and the soft prayers of those who had to endure. The rain outside sounded like a song that had no start or end. Each drop was a part of the same song and the same forgiveness. The great flood wasn't a roar. It was a whisper that went all the way across the sky. Days went by in a flash, and moments seemed to last forever. The earth below was not destroyed, but gently covered, and its memories were folded into the deep. There was no scream, no fire or thunder to mark its end. The only sound was the rain hitting the water and the silence that followed. The flood's cool arms were wrapping around the world, and it was at peace. The wind would sometimes pick up in the spaces between the rain, slowly and steadily, bringing with it the smell of salt and the faint sound of what used to be. The heavens mirrored themselves upon the water, and it was impossible to tell where the sky ended and the ocean began. It was like the world had been turned inside out. Heaven was reflected in the deep, and the deep was reflected in heaven. Everything was one, and everything was still. Noah stood at the ark's window and looked out at the horizon. He didn't see death. He saw peace. The rain fell on his face like a baptism, cool and steady. He whispered softly into the wind, not because he was scared, but because he was thankful. He could feel it, the waves' pulse of renewal and the world softly moving to find its balance again. The rain was a promise. Even though the earth was hidden, life was still there, waiting for its time to rise. The waters rose up the mountains, covering their tops in silver mist. The highest stones sank below the waves, and the earth became one big body of water that breathed in silence. The stars above were faint, but their light trembled softly across the rippling surface, as if they were watching with respect. In that never-ending silence, time lost all meaning. The days blurred together, with rain and night, light and shadow, all part of the same peaceful flow, and the world dreamed beneath it all. The tiny shells of the seeds of new forests were unbroken and full of life as they slept in the dark. The animals that used to walk the land are now still, turning to dust and memory. But deep down, where no one could see or touch them, the quiet forces of creation began to move again. The world was not dying. It was getting better. The flood was like medicine for it, a breath of fresh air from the heart of the Creator that washed away the sickness that had spread too far. The world felt empty and big when the rain finally stopped. It was like it had let out everything it had. The clouds got thinner, and faint ribbons of light shone on the endless sea. The air smelled clean and fresh. The silence that came after was peaceful, not because of the emptiness of loss, but because of the fullness of rest. The flood did not come to destroy. It came to stop and let the world sleep while heaven watched over it. Angels flew over the water without being seen, their wings gliding silently through the fog. They didn't bring a message of war or a sword. They just brought the calm promise of new beginnings. Their light made soft ripples on the surface that went on forever. People said that even the stars dimmed their light out of respect for the quiet changes happening on Earth. The moonlight made the water look like it was glowing, and a shimmering veil stretched across all of creation. The old world's towers, music, and scenes all lay buried beneath the same forgiving sea. But from that grave, life would one day bloom again, clean and pure. The flood wasn't the end. It was the last breath before the song started again. The ark floated through the never-ending silence, moved by unseen hands. The world around it slept in a sea of light. There were no cries or thunder, just the steady, deep pulse of the water below, like a heartbeat. It was the sound of peace, like the world going back to the first silence, the silence that was there before anything was made. And in that quiet, the earth got some rest. When the waters finally started to sink back into the ground, there was a lot of silence in the air. The world was clean again, and the noise and corruption had been carried away to the bottom. But not everything that was there stayed there. As the bodies of the powerful giants lay still under the new soil, something unseen moved above them. At first, it was so faint that it sounded like a sigh caught between two worlds. Their breath had stopped, but their spirits were still there, weightless, wandering, unable to find peace. They were not meant for heaven, and they could not go back to dust like men do. So they drifted, unseen and sad, like the last pieces of a time that heaven had locked away. At first, they didn't know what they had turned into. They moved through the quiet world like dreams that had been left behind at dawn. The earth was wet and new again, and it smelled clean and fresh. The rivers whispered softly through the valleys, and the wind carried no sound of the cries that used to fill it. But these spirits moved restlessly over the water and the hills that had just been kissed by the sun, looking for the warmth of bodies they no longer had. They were echoes of who they used to be big. Proud beings turned into shadows of desire. At first, they weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were just confused. They floated like fog at dusk, and their voices were too soft for human ears. They would sometimes meet near where their bones lay and talk about the lives they remembered, like the laughter that shook the ground, the mountains they climbed with ease, and the songs they sang to the daughters of men. But memory is weak for people who can't sit still. What started as remembering slowly turned into sadness, and sadness turned into anger. They saw the world in a new way, smaller, softer, and not affected by their strength. Men started to build again, lighting fires and singing soft songs to the stars. The spirits watched from a distance, unable to join in or rest. They reached out, but their hands went through everything they touched, even water, fire, and air. It was like the world had turned into a mirror, and they were stuck behind the glass, always looking in. That distance drove them crazy. The more they wanted the warmth of life, the colder they became. The old texts say they started to move in groups, like invisible tides through forests and over plains. People who traveled would talk about sudden chills and winds that carried whispers even when no one was there. Some people said they saw faint shapes by the edge of the firelight. They were tall and blurry, as if the light couldn't decide whether to show them or not. The new world didn't want them there, so it kicked them out. The sun didn't bring them comfort, and the stars didn't bring them peace. Their fathers, the watchers, who were tied up under the mountains, could no longer talk to them. Their voices were quieted by heaven. The flood had buried their memories deep. But the giant spirits still carried bits of the forbidden knowledge, echoes of the arts their fathers had taught them, like enchantments, symbols, and whispers of hidden fire. These pieces, which were broken and incomplete, became the tools of pain. They couldn't make things like they used to, so they started to change what was left. Peace grew thin wherever they stayed. A heart that had been quiet would suddenly become restless, and strange dreams would disturb a calm mind. People started to talk about invisible things that scared them of the dark, not because of what they saw, but because of how they felt. These spirits were like the wind before a storm. You couldn't see them, but you could feel their sadness deep in your heart if you listened too closely. But even though they were in pain, they weren't evil in the way that people thought evil was. They were the last pieces of something that had once been strong and bright before it fell. Some people tried to comfort themselves by whispering in the dreams of the living, hoping to be remembered. Others, filled with rage, would stir the air, bend shadows, and make the world that had moved on without them feel uneasy. They weren't from hell, but they weren't from heaven or earth either. So they walked around, not as angels or men, but as the restless in-between. Their voices found homes in the empty places, the caves where the air shook, the ruins of cities that had been forgotten, and the quiet corners of the night. The living could sometimes feel their presence, like the flicker of a candle without wind or the faint echo of a sigh. The old people said these weren't just ghosts. They were old souls who were sad about their own deaths. They were the memories of a world that had been wiped out by mercy as time went on. Their presence became a part of everyday life, the fear of the unknown and the strange pull of the dark. People started to give them names and make up stories about how mysterious they were. People called them spirits, shadows, wraiths, and demons in different languages. But none of these words really showed what they were like. They were sorrow itself, empty, restless, and looking for the life they had lost. They went back and forth between dreams and waking up, between what was and what could never be again. Some people said in whispers that they wished they could have the gift of death, rest, and peace in the dust, because they had been denied that end. Their power, which came from heaven and earth, had locked them up in the space between. Their strength was what had hurt them. They couldn't fade away. They could only drift across generations and lands, always there but never seen. They would meet up in places that were empty. They would breathe in the quiet places. The first seers and prophets didn't hate them. They felt sorry for them. They realized that these spirits were not monsters, but reminders of what happens when divine beings go too far in their creation. They made people scared, but there was also sadness in their being. Every shadow that moved in the corner of the eye brought back a memory of a being that once stood tall in the light of heaven. They stayed where the flood had been, drawn to the calm waters that had ended their world. People said that on calm nights, when the moon was low and the air was thick, the lake's surfaces sparkled not from the wind, but from the people who passed by. Some people said they could hear faint voices coming from the mist. Laughter turned to crying, and songs were cut off by silence. The waters didn't show the stars. They showed their sadness, which was deep and never ending. As time went on and people's memories faded, the spirits themselves became less powerful. Their voices, which used to echo through the veil, turned into whispers. The world was full of life, noise, and prayer again. But even now, in the spaces between thought and dream, their presence is still there, soft, empty, and sad. They are the size of a long-gone world that most people have forgotten, but everyone who has ever lost someone knows them. They are not gone. They are waiting, moving between the heartbeats of the living, remembering the light they once knew but can never touch again. The words that Enoch wrote did not go away over the course of many centuries. They moved quietly, like a secret that faith and wind carried. Empires came and went, languages changed, and scrolls turned to dust. But his writing stories of angels and floods, judgment and mercy found a home far from the centers of power. They went south, through deserts and mountains, to a place that would love and care for them. The lost words of Enoch found a home in Ethiopia, where the skies were deep blue and the earth was full of old prayers. No one knows for sure how the holy book got there. Some say that travelers, holy men who had seen the world fall apart, carried it to a place where truth could rest in peace. Some people think that angels themselves wrote the words, whispering them to hearts chosen to protect them. No matter how it happened, the writings got to people who saw their light. Ethiopia became a safe place for not only the faith of men, but also for the long-forgotten memory of heaven's oldest story. Those words were important to many generations. Monks and priests in quiet monasteries copied each line with care, their eyes soft with respect. They knew they weren't just keeping ink on parchment. They were taking care of a living flame. The world was changing outside. In faraway places, the holy books were split up, rewritten, and made shorter. Some books were thrown away, and others were said to be unfit for reading in church. But in Ethiopia's highlands, where clouds drifted low and bells rang softly at dawn, the full story stayed the same. The smell of candle wax and old parchment filled the air in those monasteries. The words of Enoch were kept safe in leather-bound manuscripts, each one as if it were the beating heart of the faith itself. And in a way, it was. For the people of Ethiopia, these writings were more than just old scrolls. They were windows into things they couldn't see. They talked about angels, the beginning of the world, and things that happened before time was measured. They connected the earth to the divine and people to the secrets of heaven. The West forgot, but Ethiopia remembered. People sang prayers in Ge'ez, the ancient language of the Bible, in stone churches carved into mountains. At dawn, monks would chant the stories, and their voices would echo through stone hallways, soft and endless like the sound of eternity. People kept Enoch's words alive, not only by reading them, but also by praying them every day, whispering them in private, and passing them from teacher to student in a chain that has never been broken by time. They were thankful for being saved. People thought that keeping these texts was a blessing in and of itself, a gift from heaven. They didn't want to change the world with it, or brag about how they were protecting it. They just kept it safe, like you would keep a light burning in a storm. It was a simple act of love to remember what others had forgotten, and to keep what others had thrown away. The pages got older and the ink faded, but the spirit stayed bright. The Ethiopian highlands stayed quiet, while the world outside got louder and farther away from its ancient roots. Scholars in faraway places fought over which books should be in the holy canon and which should be kept quiet. Councils met, wrote with pens, and made decisions. With each one, something holy was lost. But the canon was complete in Ethiopia. The books of Enoch, Jubilees, and other old writings were still next to the well-known scriptures. It was as if heaven had picked this spot to keep its secret memory safe. When travelers from faraway lands finally got to Ethiopia hundreds of years later, they were shocked. They thought they would only find echoes of their own faith and pieces of their own traditions. Instead, they found something older and deeper, a faith that had kept alive what they had long since forgotten. They discovered that the story of Enoch was still alive, not as a myth, but as a prayer sung in truth. The monks would take out manuscripts that were wrapped in cloth and had careful, old writing on the pages. The visitors would listen in awe as the words were read aloud, feeling as though they were hearing a heartbeat from the dawn of creation. Ethiopia never made these writings illegal. They were part of the divine inheritance that was given to remind people of where they came from and where they were going. People didn't look at them with fear. They looked at them with warmth, as if they were reminders of how close heaven and earth, the Creator and His creation, are. Everyone, even the youngest, heard the name Enoch and learned that he was a man who walked so close to God that he became light. They were not far from his story. It was part of who they were. Every time someone said his name, they showed respect. In the soft light of the candles, monks would talk about how Enoch had seen the secrets of heaven and how he had been the link between angels and people. They thought that remembering him would keep the bridge between the living and the dead open. People said that those who read his book with pure hearts would feel a peace come over them, as if they knew that unseen hands were still watching over the world. The hills of Ethiopia stayed still, watching and remembering, while the world outside rushed on, forgetting where it came from. Rain fell on old monasteries, and the ink on pages that were hundreds of years old seemed to shimmer in time with the rain. The holy books stayed hidden and safe in their sanctuaries. Even when conquerors came and went, kingdoms changed and maps were redrawn, the guardians never wavered. They copied and recopied, and each generation added its own breath to the living legacy. It's nice to think that somewhere in the highlands, far from noise and ambition, the pure words of Enoch were held in peace. The monks didn't keep them. They lived with them. The texts became friends with their prayers, their fasts, and their long, quiet nights. The ancient world lived on because of their devotion. The divine story kept living through them, whispering through the pages of manuscripts that had outlived empires. Thank you is the only word that can come close to what they did. They became the keepers of a cosmic memory just by having faith. Because of them, people still know the stories of the giants, the watchers, and the man who walked with God. The light that once shone on Enoch's face didn't go away completely because of them. It still glows, faintly, golden, and steadily, in the prayers of monks who still sing by candlelight in the old Ethiopian books, and in the quiet thanks of those who remember that the words of heaven were never lost, only kept safe, waiting to be heard again. He rode through the Ethiopian highlands under a sun that sparkled like a memory. The air was thin and sacred, and it smelled like dirt and wildflowers. For weeks, he had been following rumor stories that monks whispered in monasteries and smiled but didn't say much. They talked about an old book called Enoch, a name that had been lost from the Western scrolls for a long time. The traveler didn't know what he was looking for yet, but he couldn't resist the pull, as if the mountains were calling him to a promise he had forgotten. He traveled through valleys and over rivers that sparkled like melted silver until he got to a monastery carved into the cliffs, where silence spoke louder than words. The monks inside welcomed him with calm respect. Their faces showed the wisdom of many years, and their robes brushed the stone floors like a gentle breeze. The traveler talked about his interest in old texts, mysteries from before the flood, and other things. The oldest monk listened with patient eyes and then walked away into a dark hallway. When he came back, he had something wrapped in layers of cloth that was old, fragile, and treated like a living thing. The traveler saw it when the last layer fell away, pages that had been darkened by time, written in the Ge'ez language, with letters that flowed like rivers carved by divine hands. The title, The Book of Enoch, shone across the first line. The traveler shook. He had read bits and pieces of what early fathers of faith had said, short quotes, short condemnations, but the full text was gone, erased from libraries and banned by councils. But here it was, untouched by time, protected by those who had never forgotten. The monk opened the first page and began to read in the old way, with his voice rising and falling like a prayer. The traveler didn't understand every word, but he felt the weight of them, like the beat of something older than history, older than countries. The watchers, the giants, the visions of heaven, and the flood. All of these stories came to life, again in a place that the rest of the world had missed. The sun started to set behind the mountains, leaving a soft gold light on the stone. The traveler saw dust floating through the air, shining like pieces of stars. He understood then that the rediscovery of Enoch was not the discovery of a book, but the awakening of memory. What had been lost wasn't really gone. It had just been sleeping in the cradle of faith, waiting for the world to be ready again. The monks didn't hide it. They kept it safe. They copied the words by hand through wars, droughts, and the rise and fall of kingdoms, keeping the flame alive when all other lights went out. The traveler stayed with them for weeks. He learned how to follow the script's curling lines and feel the rhythm of its old poetry. Every night, in the dim light of the lantern, he would translate parts into his own language, whispering the sentences as if he were afraid to break the silence that had held them for so long. The monks watched with quiet approval, their smiles faint but kind. They knew it was time for the words to come back to life. His voice broke when he read the part where the angels took Enoch. He was so amazed. He thought of the prophet being lifted up to the sky, walking among the stars, with his heart burning with the light of knowledge that was meant for a future age. The older monk gave the traveler a carefully written copy that was sealed in wax when he was ready to leave. "The world has forgotten a lot," the old man said softly, "but not everything that is lost is gone for good. Take this with respect. Don't let it be buried again." The traveler bowed, feeling overwhelmed and not knowing how to thank the man who had just given him eternity. He rode down from the monastery with the manuscript tightly packed in his bag. The wind whispered through the trees, almost like a voice telling the stories Enoch heard in the stars. The traveler finally got to Europe months later. His trip home was slow and gave him time to think. When he finally showed the manuscript to scholars, they were shocked. At first, a lot of people were skeptical. It seemed impossible that a text like this could have survived in the highlands of Africa, while disappearing from everywhere else in the world. But when linguists looked at the writing, compared the style, and traced the text's history, they went from not believing to being amazed. This was the bridge that connected Genesis to mystery and earth to the heavens. This was the book that early fathers had quoted in parts, but never had in full. The world was full of wonder. Theologians talked in hushed tones about old truths that had been buried for a long time. Historians were amazed by Ethiopia's ability to survive when other countries had destroyed what it had. The rediscovery spread across the world like dawn, slowly at first, and then brightly and without stopping. Presses started to print the words in a lot of different languages. The pages had the same rhythm as old fire. Readers felt something move deep inside them, as if an echo of the beginning had come back. It wasn't just interest. It was recognition, a faint memory of a time when heaven and earth spoke the same language. Life went on as usual for the Ethiopian monks. They prayed, copied, and sang the old hymns. They didn't change because of the rediscovery. It only confirmed what they had always known. They had kept a sacred trust for hundreds of years, and now, like a seed buried in stone, it had finally grown. They still read from the same old pages by candlelight in the quiet of their monastery. Every syllable felt alive, and every name shimmered with old breath. Scholars in libraries and universities far away traced every line, looking for meaning. Some discovered theology. Others encountered myth. But for those who read with calm hearts, something deeper came to light. The fact that Enoch's words were never meant to disappear. They were supposed to sleep until the right people found them and the right hearts were ready to hear them.